Morning, Doug. Can you let me know you can hear me?
Hey, Tim, I can hear you. Good morning.
Hey, you sound good too. I thanks a lot for jumping on, Doug.
Yeah, good to be here. I'm just going to put myself on mute and I'll be back in a few minutes.
Sounds good. And for those that have joined us, we've got about 9 minutes before we get started. So thanks a lot for jumping on early. Morning, Chris. I'm not hearing you.
How's that?
That's good. That
Yeah.
sounds good.
New microphone. I can't remember how to work it.
Sounds good. Hey, thanks for jumping on. I'm gonna
Yep. Yep.
step away for a minute. I'll be right back. Thanks for jumping on early, folks. We've got about 4 minutes before we get started. Just wanted to say thanks and that we'll get going soon.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, Denise.
Hello.
Thanks for getting on. Are you there, Denise?
I'm here. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for jumping on.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yep.
Thanks for, yep.
All right, folks, we've got about 2 minutes, but thanks for jumping on early. We'll get rolling very shortly. All right, good morning, everyone. It's 8 o'clock, so I think we're going to get started. I'm Tim Peters. I'll turn my camera on briefly. I'm the state engineer for NRCS, and I'll be helping to moderate today and the other virtual sessions along with Chris Canfield from Penn State Extension. Chris, do you want to say hi?
Hi, good morning.
Thanks, Chris. We're really appreciate having you as part of the boot camp trainings today. This is something we've been doing as a partnership since 2001. So we've got a long history of doing boot camp trainings and training conservation professionals to go out into the field and do good work. And that's happened for decades now, which is really exciting. And it is a big partnership. There are several agencies, and we're going to hear from some of them this morning in opening comments. I do want to keep my comments here brief, so I'm going to turn it over in a second. but just wanted to say thanks to our opening comment speakers, and our first comments are going to come from Secretary Redding. Secretary Redding, I'm really glad you're able to be on the call. I know that you're on the road and a very busy person, and for those that haven't met or heard from Secretary Redding before, he has a long history of supporting Pennsylvania, agriculture in Pennsylvania, and conservation professionals in Pennsylvania. And he's been supporting the boot camp trainings for a long time as well. He's worked for over 30 years as a public servant, serving in Harrisburg and Washington, D.C., and he grew up on a farm, so he understands ag. He understands what's going on and the challenges that are in front of us and the challenges that we've overcome. And he continues to farm, has a farm in Gettysburg. So Secretary Redding, with that, really appreciate it. Thank you, and I'll turn it over to you for some opening thoughts.
Hey, good morning, Tim. Thank you. And I apologize up front for the unflattering view here from the car, but we are on our way to Philadelphia to celebrate a dairy processing plant expansion today, so important for Pennsylvania agriculture. But thanks for taking time, and to each of the boot camp participants. I always, appreciate time with you just to talk about what we're doing in agriculture. And as noted, I still farm with my wife in Gettysburg, and I tell the story often just because I see it every day. The sort of 50-year journey of conservation on the farm. My in-laws were committed to conservation. We have this picture in the house of the farm about 1955, and one that was taken about 10 years ago. And you put them side by side, they're almost unrecognizable, right? The conservation work that's been done, and that is a product of NRCS, that's the local conservation district. They're just good consultants and good farm family in the area that's been helpful to us over the years to get the conservation right. So always appreciative of those who are in that business, who know how to plan, the importance of planning, and then helping the farm, us and farmers make these really good decisions about how to conserve the soil and how to protect the natural habitat and the natural resources. Of course, at the end of the day, also be productive. And I think that's the journey of conservation, that there's a really important conservation story, but there's also an economic story in conservation. That's what you do. I mean, that's what you're planning here in this, your own work on conservation. So a note of thanks to each of you for that. But also say thanks to PACD and NRCS. I think Denise is on. We simply can't do what we do in the department and the State Conservation Commission. You'll hear from Doug in a moment, without the full support partnership of NRCS and the USDA. I think it's one of the great sort of transformations of time of where our farm bills have taken us over the last 30 years, where our own state farm bill, it makes investments in conservation excellence and REAP. So we're proud of all of that work, but ultimately this is a story of somebody on the land who owns the land wanting to make the investment, and those who are skilled to help them make the right decisions on the land. That's what you do. So thank you for that. We have significant resources now. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of momentum around our conservation work here in Pennsylvania with ACAP and NRCS and the ARPA funds. I mean, make your list. There's never been more money, resources, talent to address the needs of Pennsylvania's conservation portfolio, if you will, than right now. So look forward to that work and working with you. All of this, and I don't want to steal Denise's thunder. She speaks of sort of the systems approach, right? But that's what it is.
Email, but
yeah. Sorry, did you break up?
Oh, you're good. That was just an accident. Someone didn't realize they were unmuted. Secretary.
No worries.
Sorry
I'm
about
just
that.
saying. I mean, no issue. I mean, Denise will talk about the systems approach, and she has her sort of definition of systems. So do we. I mean, it really is about three things. It's about building on this deep culture of conservation stewardship. It's setting an expectation for good conservation practices and the adoption and implementation of those practices. And then third is making sure that we recognize agriculture's contribution to both the economic viability of the state, but doing that through a conservation story, right? And that includes climate, it includes water quality, it includes preservation. All of that is part of the system from beginning to end, beginning with a good plan, and then recognizing the contribution of each of those parties through time. So I just want to say thanks, and I appreciate the work that you're doing, the partnership that we have with conservation districts and state organizations as well, but also the relationship that each of you have with the farms and farm families across Pennsylvania. So thanks for what you do. Great to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary Redding. We greatly appreciate you carving out time, and we just appreciate the support that you've provided to the trainings and to Pennsylvania over all the years. Our next we're going to hear some opening comments from Doug Wolfgang. Doug's with the State Conservation Commission as the executive secretary now. He also grew up on a farm up in Schuylkill County, and he worked for the Bureau of Farmland Preservation for years before joining the State Conservation Commission in 2023. So, Doug, with that, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Good morning, everybody. Really a pleasure to be here. I really think boot camp is one of the most important things we do throughout the year. Just grateful, as the secretary mentioned, for the partnerships here with NRCS and PACD to make this happen. It's such an important and critical part of our overall mission with conservation. But really the key word is partnerships. Over this past year, it's become very evident to me that this work only gets done with strong partnerships between so many different organizations and individuals. So really grateful for that. But what is the State Conservation Commission? Some of you may be new to this, but State Conservation Commission is a 14-member commission that works under joint authorities of the Departments of Environmental Protection and Agriculture. We strive to find that balance between the two, but the intersection between the two, as you know, are some of the biggest issues of our time, whether it be water quality, land use, food security, increasingly climate. But it's important work, and we oversee the funding and resources then for 65 county conservation districts. And if you look at that network of individuals between the staff in conservation districts, which includes many of you, and the directors, the volunteer directors, there's a network of over 1,000 people at the grassroots level who implement conservation alongside of regional staff and county staff with NRCS and Penn State Extension. But it's just this amazing network, and that's really how the work is getting done through these partnerships. But the programs that we administer assist farmers and private landowners with installing voluntary conservation practices that improve water quality, soil health, make farms more viable. And we can't overemphasize that enough, that this has to make sense from a farmer's business perspective. And, many of these practices really have improved farm viability and make farms more sustainable for future generations. So we're so grateful for your part in this. But a lot of focus over this past year, you'll hear from Justin, I believe, later today on the Ag Conservation Assistance Program. As Secretary mentioned, that's the boost of ARPA funding that we have, $154 million from the Clean Streams Fund, which was part of the 22-23 fiscal year budget. But it will ultimately get Pennsylvania closer to reaching its goals under the Chesapeake Bay program, but statewide program, and really is going to make an improvement with local water quality throughout the Commonwealth. And we're just very excited about where we are at this point with $141 million of that committed. It has to be committed by the end of 2024 and spent by the end of 2026. So 18 months into it, we have over $50 million in signed contracts with farmers and 1,000 potential applications across the state from farmers who are seeking assistance. So it's such an amazing, opportunity for us and for producers. And many of these ACAP projects, as Denise will mention, are bundled with EQIP in partnership with NRCS. So we wouldn't be where we're at if it weren't for that partnership that with NRCS that gives us the opportunity for engineering and design for especially those structural practices. But the biggest risk factor from the beginning and up to now continues to be the need for technical assistance to design and implement practices. This issue isn't unique to Pennsylvania. It's a national issue. So that's where you all come in. We need you, and we need you to be engaged and trained and up on these issues. So we're very grateful that you're interested in conservation as a career. We've established the Technical Assistance Center in partnership with Penn State and NRCS to provide training and education. And we, need this more in the short term and longer term. And we think that the center will help to make Pennsylvania a premier destination for young people who are entering the field of conservation. Other programs in the commission include nutrient management. I believe you're going to hear from Brady Seeley later on. REAP, Resource Enhancement and Protection Program. CEG, Conservation Excellence Grant Program, which is administered in Tier 1 and 2 counties in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, and then Dirt and Gravel and Low Volumes Road Program in partnership with another center that we have at Penn State University. And of course, growing momentum behind regenerative agriculture and sustainable farming practices with more of an agronomic focus. So we're pleased that that's part of the curriculum as well for boot camp, but practices that improve soil health like cover crops and improve the water cycle and biodiversity. But we have the Sustainable Agriculture Board, which is getting ready to have its inaugural meeting, and we're hoping to bring more funding for conservation districts and other professionals to help meet the demands for climate funding and the need to help install practices associated with the tremendous amounts of climate funding, whether it be the IRA funds, which Denise will probably touch on, or other climate smart commodity projects that we have across the state. But anyway, all that said, there's never been a better time to be in the field of conservation. So pleased to be here and so grateful that you've chosen conservation to be your career. So I certainly hope that, you get a lot out of this boot camp session, and please call on me or my staff if we can ever do anything for you. But Tim, thank you. And Denise and Secretary, I'll turn it back over to you, Tim.
Thanks a lot, Doug. Greatly appreciate those comments and discussions about partnering and developing technical competency are messages that we're going to continue to preach throughout the boot camp trainings. And it's something that we really pride ourselves on, those two things as part of this course. So finally, I'd like to introduce Denise Coleman, the NRCS state conservationist, and she grew up in Northeast Pennsylvania. She started her career as a field office employee in the Northeast, and she has served stints in Washington, D.C., has been called upon to serve on multiple teams and details for our national office. Her main job, though, the past, I think, 14, 15 years has been serving as PA's state conservationist. And I also should have mentioned that Doug started his career as in a district office. And so I think that's fun to see where Doug and Denise are now. And if you want to be the next Doug or Denise, you can do that. So Denise, with that, I'll hand it over to you. Thanks a lot.
Hey, Tim, thank you. And thank you to Secretary Redding and also Doug Wolfgang. We have I think a very premier partnership within Pennsylvania. We all work closely together to train staff like yourself. And not many other places do that in the rest of the country, but we see that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And if we all come together, we bring our talents and we bring our opportunities for growth and also money and to train a cadre every year of new conservationists. And so first, I'd like to, by all means, welcome you to the field of conservation. You're choosing, I think, one of the most rewarding careers. It's been a very rewarding career for me. I'm nearly 28 years in doing this work, and every day is a new day. It's challenging. Every day is a different day, and every day is a day that we get to help and make a lasting impact on the landscape. So really, I hope that as you all look at your careers, you're in an exciting time. I think Doug and the Secretary alluded to this. We are in a point of time to really look and change the world, right? We have been tasked as conservationists to look into addressing the climate crisis that's going on across the landscape. And where can we do that? Well, we can do that on nation's private lands. You know, a lot of work is always done on public lands across the nation, but 70% of our nation's land is private land. And here in Pennsylvania, 84% of our land is private land. And so we have the opportunity to make a huge impact in the areas of water quality, soil health, carbon sequestration, wildlife habitat. So very much welcome you to the field that you're in. I think you're the pioneers of the working in the climate area. We've always done work that has impacted the climate, but never have we received such attention both at the state level and nationally for what we do on the landscape, working one-on-one with agricultural producers and forestry landowners. So very much welcome you to the field of conservation, and welcome you to the work that we do here in Pennsylvania. Just a little bit, the secretary alluded to the conversation that I generally have with beginning planners, and you do a couple things, right? You go out and you reach out to producers. Maybe they come to you, or maybe you go to them. And then what I'm a big believer in, and that's probably because I've grown up within the agency, but you plan the work and then you work the plan. And I'm a believer that if you write something down, you're more likely to do it than if you're just sitting there thinking about it and it comes and goes, right? So within NRCS and within the SCC and conservation districts, we have a very solid foundation that we work on conservation plans. We write the work down, we plan the work, and then we allow the producers to actually progressively implement conservation. And we should always, many times producers come to us with, I want this practice. But we as conservationists know that when you put one practice down, it may do address one issue, but oftentimes there's a lot of issues on the farm. There may be water quality issues, there may be wildlife issues, there may be even water quantity issues on the farm if you're dealing with specialty crops. So what we like to do is look at an entire system of conservation. And, you know, the science is behind us on this, that if we implement an entire system, a system that looks at what we call an ACT system, an avoid, control, and trap system, we are reducing the amount of sediment in our waters and the nutrients. So we want to always work with producers to keep the soil and keep the nutrients where they're supposed to be. So practices like conservation tillage, practices like cover crops, we're avoiding that soil or that nutrient from washing into the stream. And usually I have this on the board, guys. I'm sorry, I'm in the car. I'm on the way to a partnership meeting. But then we have also practices out there that control water, control what we're out there doing, making sure that those vulnerable areas are protected. And often those are things like diversions, waterways, terraces. And then finally, we have what I think a lot of folks within Pennsylvania are always touting is the trap practices, the filter practices. So all together, all of those practices work in a system, and we avoid, control, and trap. And so we always want producers, when they're working with us, and they come to us. Many of them do come for one practice, but we really want to put a system of conservation practices on the landscape so that we can truly address the resource concerns on farms and on the forestry lands. And so as you're learning this week, and this is going to be a journey that you're going to be taking as you're taking training throughout what the center is going to kind of teach you. You're going to hear about systems approach. And so that is a systems approach: avoid, control, and trap, and looking at all these things and how all of these practices can work together to get the optimum conservation on the ground. So finally, I just wanted to thank you all for being part of today's discussion. You don't have to choose a career in conservation, but you did, and I hope it's fulfilling to you as it is has been a fulfilling career for me. I think you have a great bunch of instructors today, made up of State Conservation Commission folks, Penn State and NRCS folks. And so really looking forward to hearing what you come back with in your evaluations of what we can do better, and we can bring to you and to new planners on what they can do in this time of addressing climate and addressing water quality and soil health goals. So with that said, Tim, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Denise. Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Secretary Redding, and thank you, Doug Wolfgang. We appreciate the opening comments. And as Denise mentioned, talking about systems and how all the pieces fit together, well, throughout the training today and the other virtual sessions and the in-person session, we're going to hit a variety of topics. We're going to gain an awareness of a variety of topics, and seeing how all those different pieces fit together into the system, into the big puzzle, is really fun, how that all comes together. And that's part of what this training is all about. We are going to focus on developing some technical skills as part of the boot camp trainings. We have the boot camp basic training that we're all in now, and then hopefully you all consider coming back for boot camp 2 next year or sometime after. As part of the training, we want technical skills to be developed, but we also want you to network. We think it's important that you get to know your instructors, get to know your coworkers, get to know each other. You all can be a resource for each other, and these trainings provide a great path for developing those relationships that can serve you well for the rest of your career. And we also want you to understand where some resources are. You're, like I said, get to know your instructors, but you're also going to get to know where some resources are for when you do come across different situations in the field. You know, who do you call? Where do you go? What does policy say? What design resources are available? Just a few examples, and we're going to talk about a lot more throughout the entire boot camp course. And the partnership really wants you to be successful. We want you to do well in your jobs and have the tools you need to be successful. And boot camp is just one of the ways that the partnership leadership shows that support for you as a conservation professional. One last thing. Trainings, in my opinion, are what you make of them. So to get the most out of boot camp training, I would suggest that you be as involved as possible. You know, develop those relationships, ask questions, add comments. If you have good experiences that tie to a certain topic, bring them up. Let's discuss them. Others are going to benefit. So don't be shy, be involved, be open to sharing and asking questions. And I think that's going to make a better course all around. So with that, I want to start getting into the meat of our presentations. And our first presentation is going to come from Beth Sassman from NRCS. And Beth is a supervisory district conservationist in Southeast Pennsylvania for NRCS. She's also currently the acting state resource conservationist in Harrisburg, and she has a strong biologist background. So Beth, with that, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you very much for sharing today.
Thanks, Tim. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to put on a PowerPoint presentation so that you can see our slides. Can you see it there, Tim?
I
We
see
can
it.
see it, Beth.
Okay. All right. So the first thing that we're going to talk about this morning is federal laws and regulations. And I know that that is not the most exciting topic in general, but it's sort of it's the heart, it guides what we do. So we do all these things to help farmers, but we do have some laws at the root of it, and that's what I'm going to go over this morning. So it might be a little dry, but it's important, and it's required of us. So the objectives this morning for this presentation is to understand compliance requirements when providing NRCS assistance. And when I say compliance, I'm really talking about compliance with those federal laws and executive orders, and to understand the roles and responsibilities of NRCS, its partners, and farmers in addressing compliance responsibilities. So a couple definitions to sort of lay the groundwork. Laws are written by the legislative branch and approved by the executive branch to establish authority for government. So these are the statutes. This is the what's on the books, what the laws are. The regulations are written by agencies and provide clarification to the public necessary for implementation of a law. So these regulations will show up in the Code of Federal Regulations, and folks will be able to comment on them before they become policy. The policies are written by agencies and provide internal procedures necessary to implement laws and regulations. So policies are things that we use day to day to follow through with the laws and to stay in line with what's been given to us by Congress. So the NRCS policy. NRCS helps clients plan and apply conservation practices that are in compliance with applicable laws and regulations. NRCS must comply with laws and regulations and executive orders applicable to our agency. So there's a bunch of them. There's a few listed here. The National Environmental Policy Act, which was enacted in 1970. It was written to ensure the federal decision makers take into account the environmental effects of their proposed actions and consider ways to avoid, minimize, or mitigate adverse effects before implementing the action. It's also the purpose of the NRCS environmental evaluation process. The NEPA process is intended to help public officials make decisions that are based on an understanding of environmental consequences and take actions that protect, restore, and enhance the environment. It's unique because it actually establishes a federal policy. It's the continuing policy of the federal government in cooperation with state and local governments and other concerned public and private organizations to use all practicable means and measures, including financial and technical assistance, which we do all the time, in a manner calculated to foster and promote the general welfare, to create and maintain conditions under which man and nature can exist in productive harmony and fulfill social, economic, and other requirements of present and future generations of Americans. So that's the inspiring statement from NEPA, if you want to be inspired by NEPA this morning. So it really is it really directs the federal government to take into account the environment and our impact on the environment. So that's what drives a lot of these these policies that we go through, the PNDI process and maybe cultural resources, those things. So this is the umbrella that falls under. Another important law that we deal with all the time is the Endangered Species Act, and that's the primary law in the United States for protecting and conserving imperiled species, designed to protect critically imperiled species from extinction. So the purpose of the Endangered Species Act are there two parts. It's to prevent extinction and to recover species to the point where the law's protections are not needed. You might have seen this or noticed this with the bald eagle. The bald eagle was on the endangered species list for many, many years. It was delisted and is now doing very well. They show up everywhere. We have over 200 nests of bald eagles in Pennsylvania. So that's an Endangered Species Act success story. And so there are a number of species that are on the list, and it's not often that somebody gets off the list. So that's an exciting development and kind of shows that it works. Certainly in Pennsylvania, we're looking at the bog turtle, Indiana bats, eastern Massasauga rattlesnake. So there's several species that the federal government is concerned with taking care of. So there's sort of two parts that we deal with. Section 4 of the Endangered Species Act requires the agencies overseeing the act, which in our case is Fish and Wildlife Service, to designate imperiled species, threatened or endangered, and prevent take, which means to harass, harm, hunt, or anything else. To just bother them is take. Doesn't just necessarily mean to kill. Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act is where we're directed to help conserve listed species. It also serves as a legislation to carry out the provisions outlined in the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna. So Section 7 really requires us as a federal agency and with our cooperators to follow the Endangered Species Act, to consult with those governing agencies and avoid any impacts or take. We also have some executive orders that we are looking at. There's one 11593, which requires us to protect cultural resources. There is Executive Order 12148, which requires us to protect floodplains and not impact the floodplain. One that impacts us quite a bit as NRCS is Executive Order 11990 from 1977. It is the protection of wetlands. And each federal agency must provide leadership and take action to minimize destruction, loss, or degradation of wetlands, and to preserve and enhance the natural and beneficial values of wetlands. Each agency, to the extent permitted by law, must avoid undertaking or providing assistance for new construction located in wetlands unless the head of the agency finds there is no practical alternative to such construction. So that really makes us, we can't impact wetlands at all. We have less flexibility when it comes to working in wetlands than a private citizen would. So that really keeps us in line when it comes to hurting wetlands. The Freedom of Information and Privacy Act, those two I'll talk about later. I have another slide on them, but they're enacted to protect our cooperators' information. So we can't share information from our cooperators with anyone without their written permission. So who's responsible for this compliance? And the short answer is we all are. Landowners and operators are responsible to comply with federal, state, and local laws, rules, and regulations. And this is in all of our design packages, all of our contract documents. It says that they are responsible for following all the rules. So it's not just the federal rules because we're a federal organization, or state rules because we have state employees or whatever. They're required to follow everything, and it's really their responsibility. So NRCS employees and our partners are not to assume responsibility for obtaining permits, rights, approvals, or for enforcing those laws. But what we do is guide people and give them the information that they need to get the permits that they need and get them approved. So it's their responsibility to get them, but we're sort of their guide. So we don't enforce those regulations. We inform people that they need the permits, and we provide them with the information they need to get the permits, but it's really their responsibility. And partner employees, you may have different responsibilities based on your organization, so I would encourage you to follow their rules, but that's where NRCS will be. We will always be guiding people, but not doing the permits. So do NRCS policies apply to partners? So contributing partners must adhere to NRCS Field Office Tech Guide and related policies. So that includes conservation districts, some other partner agencies like PACD planners, and those folks working under agreements. So we have people working under agreements with RC&D, Baby Pheasants Forever. If you're working under our agreement and doing our work, you do the work like we do. So those policies, those regulations and laws will apply to you. So what are your responsibilities? So you really know what practices are subject to law. So while you're planning or helping someone implement, you need to be aware of these rules that we follow. One place that we do this is when we do the environmental evaluation form. We need to provide the landowner or operator with appropriate information to get the permit, forms, whatever they need to do. And that varies by practice as well. So it's important to stay informed, and certainly Tim mentioned networking. It's good to know who your contact is, perhaps at DEP, at the local conservation district, if you're not there. It's good to know who's around and who's helping, who's doing these permits. So if you have questions, or if the farmer has questions, or you can pass them along, and it works a lot better if you know somebody and you can network that way. We do provide maps, technical data, construction plans and specifications. Anything prepared during the planning process is theirs. It's really their information, the cooperator, so they should be able to have that information to submit for a permit. Sometimes they need additional maps or special details, things like that. And I think in general, we are able to provide that to them, to the cooperator, to send off to the permitting agency. And we can provide technical assistance to implement only after they have all the permits and approvals. So sometimes that does hold up the process, but that's what we do. We're going to make sure that we're adhering to those laws and rules. So how do we comply with laws and regulations? So we use an environmental evaluation worksheet during the conservation planning process to document compliance with the National Environmental Protection Act, or NEPA. The EE worksheet was designed to assist the conservation planner with compliance requirements for applicable laws and regulations. So this is our substitute for an environmental assessment or an environmental impact statement. And so I'm going to share a EE worksheet here for a second so I can talk about it, if I can make this smooth transition. All right, can you see the CP52 that I have here?
Yep, it's up.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so if you're doing any conservation planning, you are familiar with this form. This is our environmental evaluation worksheet. It lists out all of our resource concerns that you're looking at during an inventory of planning, and then also the special environmental concerns. So this is really your guide when you're planning, and I encourage folks to use it at the very beginning. As seasoned planners, we sometimes let it off to the end because we know what's in the form, but it's nice to have it with us so it's kind of a checklist for us. So if you move down through the resource concerns, which I'm not going to talk about right now, the section G is the special environmental concern. So it talks about environmental laws, executive orders, and policies. So this is your guide to what federal rules you're subject to at the current time. Sometimes these things change, and then we get a new form, and we tell everyone they have to use the new form. So please pay attention to those changes, because you'll want to be using the current form. It's the best guide. So we're bound to follow the Clean Air Act and assess it, the Clean Water Act and Water of the United States, Coastal Zone Management, which does not affect us in Pennsylvania, nor coral reefs, cultural resources, and that is something I'm sure that it's a state regulation too, so we go through that cultural resources process. I talked about threatened and endangered species. We use the PNDI system here in Pennsylvania to assess that, and the consultation process that follows, which is really instructed right on that PNDI receipt. So it's a pretty easy process. We have to look at environmental justice. We do not have essential fish habitat in Pennsylvania. We are required to look at floodplains, invasive species. Both of those are driven by an executive order. Migratory birds and the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act. So that's the International Migratory Bird Treaty Act. It's interesting. All of we go through all of these things. If you really look at the laws, they're really interesting to see. Migratory birds. Any migratory birds are protected. So unless there's a season, we can't affect them, and we can't affect them if there is a season either. But there's no take on those birds. We have to look at natural areas, prime and unique farmlands, and if we're converting them, riparian areas, scenic beauty. And I don't know why there's a big white space on this form, but wetlands, and I talked about wetlands. There's a few places that we have to look at wetlands, but it's mostly that executive order that I talked about. The wild and scenic rivers are protected by the National Park Service, and there is an assessment online for that as well. And the form, when you download it, actually has guide sheets that will take you and tell you how to assess it. So I'm going to go back to my presentation when I find my Teams window. Just gonna buzz through here. I stopped it. Okay. So the other part of this is sharing information. So if you've worked with NRCS for any amount of time, you know that we're very sensitive to sharing information about farmers, conservation plans, design information, whether or not they have a plan. We don't want to just be telling everyone. It's kind of like when you go to the doctor and they won't tell anybody your health information because of HIPAA. So the Freedom of Information Act is a law that protects us. Everyone can access records, but we can't release them except through this process. So they will, if someone does a Freedom of Information Act request, it will go through our Freedom of Information Act officer. They will redact what they need to redact and release it in accordance with this law. The Privacy Act of 1974 was enacted to protect individuals against unwarranted invasions of their privacy stemming from collections, maintenance, use, or disclosure of personal information about them by federal agencies. So the Privacy Act really covers everything, and so we can't release any information about a cooperator. So the Farm Bill added, the 2008 Farm Bill has a what we call 1619, Section 1619. It is in all the following versions of the Farm Bill. So so we've had this for quite a while now. We can't disclose any information provided by a producer concerning their operation. So that's even crop rotation, tillage, number of animals, those sorts of things. It's all protected information. Or the land itself. So really a map of it, the conservation plan, a job sheet, all of those things are protected if they're made for the cooperator, an individual cooperator, and they have their information on them. We can't share it. We also can't share geospatial information. Even as aggregates, we have to make sure we have enough instances of the practice before we can put it on a map for folks, because we don't want people to be able to discern an individual and the information about the individual. So we take this really seriously, and we try to really protect people's information because it is sensitive, and we want to have their trust. We're out on a farm to be helpful, and that's from beginning to end. So we don't want them to worry that we're going to then give their information to their neighbor. It's their plan. It's their information to share. So sharing data between partners. So Privacy Act requires prior written consent of the individual to whom the record pertains. So we have a release of authorization form that we use, and we use it commonly for many instances. So if someone needs a plan sent to Farmland Preservation, we would need that form. If there's any potential conflicts for the PNDI, we need a release before we can release information about the farm on that. So it's really important that we're careful and we release only the information that's requested, and we have a written permission. We can also, and I think the easiest way to do this, although it puts a little bit of effort on the farmer, if they need a copy of their plan to submit to someone, it's easiest to just give it to them and let them decide what they're going to send. It takes that responsibility off of us and gives them the power. So that's always, in my mind, that's always the best way to do it. Certainly, folks don't want to deal with passing things back and forth, but that is the way to do it because it's theirs. It's theirs to share, and we have requirements that make us protect that information. So we sort of sometimes seem evasive when people call, and I try very hard when folks are asking questions to be as forthcoming as possible without sharing individual information. But sometimes it's hard when you have an angry neighbor or someone with a question about even somebody that's asking, hey, I saw my neighbor has this really nice tank. What did he do out there? What is that? Even that information in a curious way is protected. So we have to be careful about that. So that's the end of what I have for federal regulations. Does anybody have any questions? And I can put the slides. I have a PDF of the slides, and is it okay if I drop them in the in the chat or on the files here,
Sure.
Tim? Or will that cause
Yeah,
a problem? Okay.
that is fine. And if anybody can't access the chat, we can get the presentation to them after the fact. Just reach out to Chris or myself or Shannon. One of the three of us could work to get the presentations back out to anybody that wants it. We do not have any questions in the chat right now, but if you think of something later, Beth will, I think you're around for other parts of the training, or we can track you down if someone does have a question. So Beth, thank you very much. All right.
Yes, thank you.
Chris, do you want to take over? And
Yeah, so next up, I think we have laws and regulations on state and local impacts to technical assistance with Brady Seeley and Nathan Radabaugh. I think Nathan and Brady are both on.
Yes, we're here.
Morning.
So I'll go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to kick us off here. Hopefully everybody's seeing my PowerPoint right now.
Yep, we can see it, Brady. It's not in presentation mode yet.
Okay, let me switch my screens around here real quick. Give me 1 second here. Better?
There we go. Yep.
All right.
You're good.
Thank you. So I'm just going to give everybody a bit of a warning here. This is my first time giving this presentation. My predecessors prior to me always gave this, so this will be my very first time giving this. So hopefully I can do an adequate job or just as good a job as those before me. But I am Brady Seeley. I am the director of the Nutrient Management and Odor Management Programs at the State Conservation Commission. I took over for my predecessor, Frank Schneider, who was in this position for several years. So we're going to talk about some state laws surrounding environmental and agricultural regulations. The key here that we want to try to make is a lot. This is a conservation partnership, is what we like to call it. We have many different partners or sister organizations that complete this work, and you can see some but not all listed here on the screen. And we're kind of pointing out some of the different agencies, the state agencies, federal, as well as Penn State Extension, PACD. But there's also a lot of private partners that we have as well, and other public organizations as well. So while we have a few listed here, just know that you may run into many more in your work when it comes to conservation that you'll be working with in the future. To emphasize, I can change there we go. To emphasize, we all have a common goal when it comes to this conservation partnership. One of those goals being assisting agricultural landowners and operators with development and implementation of resource management plans. And those could be nutrient and manure management plans, ag E&S plans, conservation plans, whatever they may be. That we do have that common goal of assisting the landowners and operators and best utilizing their resources, best utilizing their land, and whether it's also utilizing their nutrients, keeping soil on their fields. That's our ultimate goal. We just maybe have some different methods of achieving that goal. One of them being compliance. My area, I work in regulation, so I achieve that common goal through regulatory purposes of making sure operators who are in my program have their appropriate plans, are managing their resources appropriately. Also, it can be achieved through meeting requirements for resource management programs. A good example of that is at NRCS. They're a volunteer program. They provide a lot of technical assistance and provide many other, assistance opportunities for landowners when it comes to achieving this common goal. So the roles that we have here, I'm just going to go over them briefly, and many of you may already know these, and they've already been kind of hit on a little bit. But NRCS, they're the technical systems provider for a lot of the plan development and implementation, especially when it comes to BMP implementation. They're the ones we go to for any technical guidance or assistance. They also help to guide the producer to other partners or organizations that can assist them when it maybe comes to gaining compliance or getting further assistance. The conservation district, they are the boots on the ground. That's at least what we always say here at the state. They assist the producers to meet their regulatory and program obligations and requirements. They also help the producer to find the appropriate technical provider when it comes to any sort of resource concerns they may have. And they also assist in the application process for permits and financial assistance with it, whatever issue the landowner may be seeing. They serve a very important role. Like I said, they're the local people that the landowners can turn to, and they administer many different programs. And Nathan's going to touch on a variety of those programs later on. We also have Pennsylvania DEP. They focus with program development, guidance, permit review, and enforcement activities. They in some instances will delegate duties down to the conservation district for programs to implement. And then lastly, we have the State Conservation Commission, PDA, Department of Ag, and Pennsylvania Penn State Extension. Again, we work in program development, policy and guidance, education support. That's a big aspect of Penn State Extension. It's the education and support aspect. We rely on them heavily for that component. One other aspect that SCC and PDA get involved with is also enforcement activities, just like PADEP. So I'm actually going to go backwards in the slide. In my mind, it makes a little bit more sense. So I'm going to actually start with the CAFO program, because those are the least amount of operations in Pennsylvania. So the CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations, they are the most highly regulated animal operation in Pennsylvania. The CAFO program is a federal EPA program that is administered by DEP. The program is based on animal numbers or animal density of the operation itself. So farms with over 1,000 AUs, CAOs with over 300 AUs, or just sheer animal numbers will throw an operation into the CAFO category. They are then required to obtain an approved nutrient management plan, obtain a CAFO permit. The plan must be written by a certified planner, reviewed by a certified specialist, either at a county conservation district or at the State Conservation Commission, and then approved as well. And then these plans and documents are publicly available. So we have over 450 CAFOs in the state currently. So going to the middle there, we're now going to look at concentrated animal operations. So this is the second largest group, CAOs. Those are high animal density farms. We're looking at over 2,000 pounds of live weight per acre for the animal density calculation. We commonly refer to that as 2 AEUs per acre. That is when they get thrown into the category of a CAO. You can see there are some overlap between CAOs and CAFOs. Not all CAFOs are CAOs. Some CAFOs, we refer to them as volunteer. They do not meet the CAO threshold, but they are still required to obtain an approved nutrient management plan. So just like with CAFO, CAOs, they have to have an approved nutrient management plan that they must implement. And again, it has to be written by a certified planner, reviewed by a certified specialist at the district or commission. And again, these are public records, or these plans are approved at a public meeting, so they become public records. And then lastly, the largest group are our animal operations. So we have over 23,000 animal operations in Pennsylvania. You can see that encompasses everything at this point. CAOs and CAFOs are all considered animal operations, but if they do not meet those thresholds, they are only they have a lesser requirement that they must meet. They must obtain a Chapter 91 Manure Management Manual, and Nathan will discuss this a little bit more in detail as well. But this is the basic state requirement for any operation that generates or utilizes manure in Pennsylvania that is not regulated under the Act 38 or CAFO programs. And here's just a listing of some of the other laws and regulations that we're going to get into today. We're going to, start out with a lot of laws that DEP oversees, and then we'll go into the State Conservation Commission and some other PDA programs. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to Nathan.
Nathan, you're muted.
Sorry, start again.
That's okay.
Goodness. Yep. So my name is Nathan Radable. I am a water program specialist with DEP's Bureau of Watershed Restoration and Non-Point Source Management for all your agricultural manure management and ag erosion and sediment control. That is kind of where it is honed in DEP. So let's get into it here. We'll start with the Federal Clean Water Act. And next slide for me, Brady. Thank you. All right. So the Clean Water Act, enacted in 1972, was a follow-up to the Federal Water Pollution Control Act that was originally enacted in 1948. But in 1972, it saw reorganization, expansion. With that act, it established the basic system that we know as NPDES, NPDES, all that good stuff. But that was the program that was created to control those discharges because it was no longer legal to do it without a permit. So where that comes into play here, CAFOs are regulated under this NPDES system. And CAFOs, as he had mentioned earlier, these are farms that are either going to be over 1,000 AEUs, they're going to be concentrated animal operations with over 300 AEUs, or it's going to meet these animal head numbers that EPA has set. So some of those are 700 dairy cows, 1,000 beef cattle, 55,000 turkeys, and then poultry, whether they be layers, broilers, ducks, anything, sheep. If you're over a certain amount of those animals, you have to have an NPDES permit through the state. And in state, DEP manages that program. It's what we call a PAG 12 permit, which is the general permit for CAFOs, or you can have an individual permit if you do not meet the criteria to have a general permit. And that's going to come down to, the location of your farm, how close you are to a water body, the quality of that water, whether it be exceptional value or if it's already impaired by nutrients, and then, the compliance history of that operation. Those are things that all go into determining if you're eligible for that general permit or if you need an individual permit. And next slide, Brady. All right, so here is the big one, Pennsylvania's Clean Streams Law. Next slide. So Pennsylvania's Clean Stream Law was originally enacted back in 1937. Reasons for it were to regulate any discharge which may cause or contribute to pollutions of the waters of the Commonwealth. It established the authority that we now rely on as DEP and regulatory agencies to protect our streams and waters from pollution. And this law is what allows us to have things like, as we're going to go through here, to regulate manure, ag erosion, to have Act 38. Without the Clean Stream Law, we don't have everything we have now. It's very unique to Pennsylvania. Not many states have something that can compare to this to give them the authority to protect their waters like we can. And then next slide. Next one will be, all right, now we're going to talk about chapter 102, which as you can kind of see from the slide here, we're going to be talking about erosion and sediment control. One more slide, Brady. There we go. All right, so there's different parts of chapter 102. So chapter 102 for B regulates construction activities. And we're not going to get too much into that now. But we're really going to talk about 102 for A, which is your agricultural erosion and sediment control. So who needs, who does this apply to? So any operation with plowable/tillable land, and that includes no-till, because although it is no-till, there is still earth disturbance with its use. And then any operation with heavy use areas. All right, so definitions here. Animal heavy use area is a barnyard, feedlot, loafing area, exercise lot, or any similar area on an agricultural operation where, due to the concentration of animals, it is not possible to establish and maintain vegetative cover of a density capable of minimizing accelerated erosion and sedimentation. And this term does not include entrances, pathways, and walkways between areas where animals are housed or kept in concentration. So combined areas less than 5,000 square feet require best management practices to be implemented to minimize accelerated erosion and sedimentation. So here what we're talking about, you don't, if you have less than 5,000 square feet of bare earth or earth disturbance, you don't have to make a formal Ag E&S plan, but you do need to have best management practices. So if you have one or two small areas that are just bare all the time because they're where your feed bunk is or your watering trough, you still have to do your job to make sure that you are not causing pollution from that. So would it be just routing your stormwater around it, or things like that? Simple BMPs that keep the pollution from coming from those areas are good enough. You don't have to have a formal plan. But combined areas of 5,000 square feet or greater do require an ag erosion and sediment control plan and BMPs to minimize the accelerated erosion and sedimentation. Next slide, Brady. All right, so your requirements under chapter 102 for sheet and rill erosion, you have to meet the tolerable soil loss of the rotation. I'm not going to get too much into that because that's going to be something you'll be covering in here. But we all have to meet that T, and that's your responsibility under 102. Develop that plan, and manage your practices in such a way that you are able to meet that soil loss. And then concentrated flow. An E&S plan should identify the areas of concentrated flow and the BMPs that are being used to address that area. And areas of concentrated flow, we're talking about whether it be something that formed due to stormwater and it's damage to your field, now it's there, or if you are if you're looking at your plan and you've got these areas of concentrated flow, you have to manage them. And then let's see here, animal heavy use areas. The animal heavy use areas, or ACAs, must be identified in your plan, and it must have BMPs to address them. And then the NRCS conservation plan can be used to satisfy the requirements. If you have a conservation plan that's up to date and accurate and identifies all the issues and how you're managing them, that's good enough. You do not need to come up with another formal E&S plan. Next slide, Brady. And then briefly here, if you want to go to DEP's website and find our information, this is how you get there. DEP, and then kind of follow the tabs there. It's also really easy to just go on Google and type in like DEP ag erosion and sediment. That will get you to their website a lot faster than trying to go through these links here. But also linked here at the bottom, if you'll get a copy of these slides, is a link to the most recent copy of DEP's Ag E&S manual. 2019 was the most recent update to it. So if you got that one, you're still up to date and good with that. And then next slide, Brady. And then if you want to, DEP does have our Clean Water Academy. Most likely if you are working for a conservation district or a state agency, you already have access to this and you've at least heard of it. But I think anyone can go to this website here. Even if you're with NRCS, you can go here to our Clean Water Academy website take this course here. It's been kind of broken up into 3 different sections there, whether you're the landowner, you're a plan writer, or if you just want the general overview, you can pick one of these sections and just whichever one applies to who you are. But there's some good information there that really breaks it down for you. Next slide, Brady. And then again, here is training that you can take online if you are someone who is looking to hold workshops. This is just a couple courses you can take to kind of help you to facilitate training for others. All right, next one there, chapter 105. Next slide. All right, so chapter 105 is your water obstructions and encroachments. The objective of chapter 105 is to prevent unreasonable interference with water flow from in-stream construction activities. So it provides for the regulation and oversight of water obstructions and encroachments into waters of the Commonwealth, assures proper planning, design, construction, maintenance, and monitoring of water obstructions. Most stream water body and wetland encroachments do require a permit from DEP. Most activities qualify for a general permit. And when we say general permits, it's pretty much, it's a cookie cutter permit that we have. There's one for CAFOs and dams and this replacements and stream encroachments. It's just kind of a cookie cutter thing. The criteria is set. There's nothing special that you have to do based on your operation that everyone else isn't doing. Let's see. And then, yeah, so one thing, if you are working on a project on an operation and you think, or even if you think that you might need a permit, you should contact DEP, get the process started. Some of our permits are quick and easy, and you just need to fill out some forms, but some take more work. They might, depending on the size of your project, it may take longer for approval. So, as soon as you know that you might need a permit, just get that process started. Go ahead, Brady. All right. So yeah, so I guess I kind of jumped ahead, but so yeah, our general permits are DEP approved permits where applicants registers to utilize the permit. Typically, GP projects are small in scope and size, and there are some situations where you can waive that permit, or well, we can waive that permit. I'm not going to get into much of that, but that information is available on our website if you are interested. Go ahead, next slide. So some planning considerations for 105. The producer should have an Ag E&S plan or a conservation plan. It should identify in that plan the BMPs, or best management practices, that need to be implemented. Location of wherever that project is, it should be in the plan. So I should look at the plan and be like, oh yeah, here's a stream crossing. There's the fencing that they're going to put in with it. This is when it's supposed to be done by. Things that, as planners, you have to consider when you're talking with your operators. Is the project going to result in encroachment on a waterway or a wetland? And which permit is going to be appropriate and necessary for that project? So briefly, here's a list of all of the 105 general permits. You can kind of read through here briefly and look, and you'll see that there's several different types here. Each one comes with, is for a different purpose, specifically a different set of criteria and information that they're going to need for each. So if you go to DEP's website, it's going to have a fair amount of information for each one. But if you're not sure, contact your regional offices to get that ball rolling and get squared away with all the information you're going to need. Next slide. All right, so here are some common BMPs that you're going to encounter that do require general permits. Things like stream crossings, underground outlets, grass waterways, lined waterways, subsurface drains, pipelines, a sort of stream bank or shoreline protection. Those are all going to require a general permit. All right, go ahead, Brady. Okay, so yeah, here is information regarding where you need to go to get all the good stuff for GPs. So each project needs to be registered. So there's a general permit registration packet, some information that needs to be filled out. It does need to be signed and submitted by the operator or the landowner, not the planner. It's not saying you can't do it, help them do it, but they need to be the one to submit it because it's ultimately their responsibility. And then, each GP does have its own fee related to it. And, that link there, if you follow it, will take you and get you more information on the fees. And then construction. So the construction aspect of the project, construction activities cannot proceed until approval or acknowledgement is received from DEP or a delegated conservation district. And once again, go to our website if you need more information about which conservation district counties are delegated what level of authority for permits. It varies by county. Some counties do almost everything, not everything, but they do a significantly amount of the permit approvals, and 102 and 105 themselves. Some counties don't have any delegation at all in that realm, and it still falls on DEP. So just check on that information. And then each permit does have a specific conditions that need to be met, and then also conditions where it does not apply. So if you grab a permit and you're going through and you're filling out and you say, oh, this does not apply to this situation and this situation, and you realize that's what's going on your operation, take a step back. There may be a little more stringent process that needs to be followed based on what you're looking to implement. All right, and then next slide there. And then once again, if you want to find this information for 105 on our website, business tab, water, and then waterways, engineering, wetlands. Or once again, I've always found it's still faster just to Google search DEP and then chapter 105 or GP3 permits. That'll get you there a little quicker than going through our website. Next one. Okay. So joint permit applications. This is for obstructions and encroachments that do not qualify for a waiver or a GP. You're seen applying to the small projects with very insignificant impacts. So if you've got no increase in local flood heights or patterns, your project does not include wetlands. Some brief stuff here. Examples: streamside retaining walls, removal of flood debris, and then repair, reconstruction, or replacement of existing water obstructions. So these here are going to be jointly reviewed by DEP and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. You will send it to DEP only, and we will handle the review process. Again, if you search for joint permit on our website or through Google, you should be able to get there. Chapter 275 is going to be talking about, next one, biosolids. So once again, this falls still under the Clean Streams Law. Chapter 275 is going to oversee the regulation of biosolids. So the program is monitored and enforced by DEP. In order to apply biosolids, they must be applied with a permit at agronomic rates according to nutrient management, nutrient or manure management plan. Sorry. So there is still specific guidance. It's not just, oh, I have biosolids and I can put as much as I want wherever I want. No, there's nutrients in it. There's an agronomic rate that needs to be followed, and there are still specific setbacks for those application rates. And I'm not going to go through that whole program because it can get a little complicated. But there is a separate manual for biosolids and kind of a separate full oversight of that. So check out our website there if you run into biosolids. We can get if you don't find what you need there, contact one of us or the SCC staff. We'll be able to get you straightened away. Okay, so next one we're going to be talking about animal operations. Okay. All right. So in our regulations, it says that all farms and entities in Pennsylvania that land apply manure or agricultural processed wastewater must have approval to do so from DEP. Now, if you are a CAO or a CAFO, the way you meet that approval is you get a nutrient management plan. It gets reviewed, and there's an approval process. For everyone else who does not a CAO or CAFO, we call these regular agriculture operations. The way you meet those regulations is you have a manure management plan. So right now, if there's a farm out there that does not have a nutrient management plan or a manure management plan, and they are applying manure either by mechanical means or animals in pasture, you are not meeting regulations. So whether you have 1 or 2 horses in your backyard or you have 125,000 broiler chickens, you need to have a manure management plan. So, it is regardless of the origin. If you are importing manure from a neighbor or a nearby farm and applying it on your land, you need to have a manure management plan. So, I mentioned there, regardless of application type, directly applied by animals or mechanically applied, you need to have a plan. And also mechanical application also includes the use of hand tools. So if you're out there with a pitchfork, you're mechanically applying manure. All right, next one there. Okay, go ahead and hit these couple here, Brady, because okay. So yeah, you guys have all seen this slide earlier, and we just briefly talked about it. Doesn't matter which one of these circles you fall into. If you are in one of these circles, you need to, have a plan to meet the regulatory requirements. Next slide, Brady. And then here is a brief kind of flow chart here that can be used if you're still not familiar with the difference between CAFO, CAO, and agricultural operation. This is from Penn State Extension, but this is a guide sheet you can use. Some people print this out and keep it in their tube or for a while until they get used to everything. It's a nice resource that can kind of guide you to figure out which kind of plan does this operation need. The Chapter 91 is manure management. All right, so diving into Chapter 91 here. So 9136A regulates animal manure storage facilities. There is specific design and construction criteria for manure storages. And kind of looking at what that is, if you are, let's see here. So manure storages should be constructed to prevent pollution of surface and groundwater, including design to prevent discharges during a 25-year, 24-hour storm. And then, constructed to meet the standards of the PA Technical Guide. Any liquid or semi-solid manure storage constructed after January 29, 2000 must have been designed and certified by a registered professional engineer. And that includes, this regulation also includes the freeboard requirements that apply to each. So if, say, DEP comes out and they, we're going to a farm, we're never been there, asking if they have their plans, we may ask you to get your manure storage certified if it was built after that date and you do not have an engineer certification already on hand. And then Chapter 9136B, this is what regulates that land application of manure and agricultural process wastewater. So any operation that land applies manure or process wastewater must have and implement a written manure management plan in accordance with the manure management manual unless you meet it in a different way. Another way you can meet it is if you enter the Act 38 program and become a volunteer animal operation and get a nutrient management plan. Then again, CAOs and CAFOs are already meeting those requirements. And then here is a link to what for another month will be the most recent version of the manure management manual. We have revisions being published here end of April. So keep an eye out for that. Go ahead, next slide. All right, so diving into those requirements for manure management plans. And one, it must be a written plan, which of course that does not mean it has to be handwritten. It can be using a template on Word or Excel, Adobe. You do not need a certification to develop a manure management plan. Plenty of people in the state have done it themselves. But, if you're trying to do it, if a farmer's trying to do it themselves and they're repeatedly just coming, it's just not coming and be a complete plan. Eventually you may get to a point where we may step in and say, hey, listen, it's been 6 months back and forth. It's time for you to get someone to help you with this plan. Right now, your options for a manure management plan are to use the standard format that is in our manure management manual. You can also meet the regulations by having a NRCS 590 plan. When PA One Stop, they've used their manure management module, that will also be acceptable. And then, of course, becoming a VAO and having a nutrient management plan is also another option. You do not have to submit your plan to us for approval unless we perform an inspection and ask for it. or respond to a complaint, then you do need to have it on site and produce it. But it should always be on site in the operation, whether anyone's there to ask for it or not. The plans do include, your manure application rates, your setbacks. If you're going to be applying manure in winter, there are specific criteria that need to be listed in the plan and met. Your manure storages, your stacking pads all need to be in the plan. How you are managing your pastures, if you have animal concentration areas, and then along with this, with the manure aspect, also, agricultural process wastewater, if you are producing that or applying it on the operation, it needs to be in the plan. And then there are specific records that need to be kept. If you have a manure storage, you should be performing, at least a monthly inspection on it to make sure everything's still there. Make sure if you have berms, around the lagoon, making sure there's not rodents and tree growth, making sure there's no cracks and seepage in your concrete tanks. You've got transfer pipes and everything. If there's, let's make sure it's not spraying out of little holes and pinholes like I've seen often. Yeah. And then, okay, next slide. All right, so that is the Penn State link pictured there for their nutrient management website. You can get a lot of good information there. Also on our website, you can go to our website and just search for manure management. You can get copies of our manual that are easy to print off. You can get the workbook section if you don't want the whole thing. Lots of resources for how to, but anything for manure management. There's our manure management's website, and that should be able to get you any information you need. Next slide there. All right, chapter 92A. All right, so once again, here's a quick little reference sheet of, is my operation a CAFO? Just very briefly want to point out in that top hexagon there, you see, all the number thresholds that if you exceed any of those, you are a CAFO and you need to have a permit. So, there's different levels for horses, swine, cattle, ducks, chickens, sheep, turkeys. If you're at any of those thresholds, you do need to have a CAFO permit. And as mentioned before, if you have more than 1,000 total AEUs on your operation of animal weight, you need a permit. Or if you are a CAO with 300 AEUs or greater, you need a CAFO permit. Okay, next slide. All right, so the EPA wrote the regulation on CAFOs. We are delegated. DEP is delegated from the EPA to manage and enforce that program. So CAFOs, they need that NPDES permit. Based on the type of animals you have, type of manure storage you have, there are additional requirements for that. There are additional and more stringent record keeping requirements. And then, you do have an inspection requirement where DEP comes to inspect you every year. There is an annual review that is conducted either by the SCC staff or the delegated conservation district. And that is an on-site review where they actually come out to the farm once a year and review your plan, review that everything is still being done in accordance with your plan. And then with that, each CAFO needs to have a nutrient management plan. And then if you have, and if it's applicable, an erosion and sediment control plan. With that, any CAFO, before you apply, your permit is finalized, as part of the process, there is public notice that is required to be posted to let the public know, hey, this CAFO is going to be at this location. And then next slide there, Brady. All right, so with that, there is also requirement in our regulations that certain facilities need to have a water quality management permit. This typically applies to new or expanded liquid or semi-solid manure storages constructed after October 22nd, 2005. And then here's a flow chart to kind of say, just usually, if you have between 1 million and 2.5 million, then luckily you're probably going to need a water quality management permit. Next slide. All right, so getting into who needs a water quality management permit. New or expanded liquid or semi-solid storages with AEUs greater than 1,000 on the operation, or between 1 and 2.5 million gallons if you're in a special protection watershed or if you're in a impaired watershed. And then all liquid or semi-solid storages of 2.5 million gallons or more will need a water quality management permit. And then these have to be certified by a registered professional engineer and stamped off at the end that it was built as it's supposed to be. Everything is structurally is sound and it is safe to operate essentially. And then individual CAFO permits, briefly mentioned on that, but those are usually special protection watersheds or occasionally operations with a history of non-compliance with our regulations. And next slide there. All right, so briefly, once again, search for DEP CAFOs, it'll take you right to the right website you want. And then, okay. And then next slide, Brady, and then is back to you.
All right. Thanks, Nathan. So I'll continue on here, finish us off. There was a question in the chat about who is enforcing if farmers have an Ag E&S plan. And just to, I mean, it was already kind of answered a little bit there, but just to answer that, I mean, DEP is the ultimate enforcement authority when it comes to Ag E&S plans. Conservation districts, if they're contracted with the Chesapeake Bay program, are doing Bay Ag inspections, verifying if Ag E&S plans are on site. But DEP has the ultimate authority. Nathan, anything to add to that?
No, I think you're right there. Yeah, when it comes to the Ag E&S or the Chapter 91 manure management plan side, DEP is the home for that. And specifically my section, typically a lot of that stuff is handled usually regionally with our regional offices. But yeah, if you have questions or you need get in contact with someone for those issues, you can use me as a line. I'll get you in touch with the right person.
All right, thanks, Nathan. So I'm going to dive into a little bit more about Act 38 of 2005. Just a little bit of background here. So originally this was called Act 6, which was passed in 1993, became effective in 1997. It was then revised to Act 38 in 2005, and that was to address phosphorus because Act 6 only addressed nitrogen. So Act 38 brought in looking at both nitrogen and phosphorus, then or regulating applications of nitrogen and phosphorus, as well as to close a loophole regarding tracking of exported manure. Before in Act 6, we didn't really have any good method of tracking exported manure, and Act 38 closed that loophole. Act 38 officially became effective in 2006. That's when the regulations were finally finalized and approved, and technical guidance was released. And Act 38 not only revised the nutrient management program, but also created the odor management program, which I'll talk about a little bit later here, as well as included the agricultural communities and rural environment provision, which is commonly referred to as ACRE. That's part of Act 38 as well, which again I will discuss a little bit later on here. So the Act 38 nutrient management program, its objective is to preserve water quality in Pennsylvania. It's a water quality program. That's its essential objective. It creates nutrient management planning standards for certain agriculture operations. Those would be CAOs and or volunteer operations if they choose to enter the program voluntarily. It requires development of a nutrient management plan and or nutrient balance sheets, depending on the operation itself. It's administered by the State Conservation Commission, but we do delegate that authority to conservation districts. We have 55 delegated conservation districts in the nutrient management, manure management programs, where they will review and approve the nutrient management plans that are submitted in their county. That covers that. So what is a nutrient management plan? Here are some of the basics of it. It IDs the nutrient sources on the farm. So essentially the generated manure, or if any manure is imported to the farm, as well as addressing mortality, animal mortality compost, that if that is on the operation as well. It determines application rates and manure application restrictions. So we have restrictions or limits on how much manure can be applied at one time in Pennsylvania. 9,000 gallons per acre, and one application cannot be exceeded. And also manure application restrictions revolving around setbacks, so 100 feet from wells, 100 feet from streams, items like that. It describes the handling of excess manure. So if there's more manure that the operation produces on the farm than it can utilize, that manure needs to be exported to either a known operation for land application or potentially alternative uses, such as going to a landscaping company to be composted and used as a soil amendment, or it could also be brokered. It could be exported to an individual certified in the Act 49 program that takes ownership and control of that manure and will find a use for it at a later date. It identifies BMPs that need to be implemented on the operation. One thing I'll note here is that any BMPs that are identified in the nutrient management plan, the operator is legally obligated to implement those BMPs that are addressing those resource concerns. So that's one aspect of the plan that farmers are required. Well, they're required to implement the plan fully, but I just wanted to make a special note that if a BMP is in the plan to be implemented to address resource concern, that operator is legally obligated to implement that BMP, or they could propose an alternative BMP or alternative management method. The key there is that the resource concern is being addressed. And lastly, the nutrient management plan, they need to be consistent with conservation plan activities. And this is a real key point here. We want the conservation plan or Ag E&S plan to be similar to the nutrient management plan. So we don't want inconsistencies between those plans. If the conservation plan calls for a heavy use area, we don't want to see the nutrient management plan calling for prescribed grazing. Those would conflict with each other potentially. So we want those plans to be consistent with each other. And one other aspect of the Act 38 nutrient management program are the nutrient balance sheets. They are essentially a simplified nutrient management plan. Nutrient balance sheets are geared towards mainly addressing land application of manure. They don't have all the components of a nutrient management plan, but essentially the meat and potatoes of the nutrient management plan are included in balance sheets. So it's determining manure application rates on the importing farms. The application rates focus on crop nutrient needs, where the nutrient management plan is focusing on a field by field method of planning. Here are some website links to our various nutrient management program web pages. The top one there is our commission website link. It takes you to the commission website regarding nutrient management program. But the bulk of the information that is relevant and good to look at is our nutrient management program website that is hosted by Penn State Extension. That's where you can find a lot of good education materials and a lot of good tools that can assist in any nutrient management planning, as well as manure management planning too. So the other aspect of the Act 38 Act 38 that I discussed earlier or mentioned earlier is the odor management program. So what essentially this program is, it addresses the potential for impacts from the off-site migration of odors from animal housing, manure storage facilities. So that is key there, that this program only regulates animal housing and manure storage facilities. It does not address odors from field application. And I should also say it would be for any animal housing, manure storages that are new or proposed to the operation. Existing facilities are not regulated under this program. So one thing I want to point out here, the reason that odors from the facilities are regulated, not odors from field application, is odors from field application are acute. They are not chronic like the animal housing manure storage facilities are. If you're living near an operation with a manure storage, you may smell that manure storage multiple times during the year, where field application, that odor is only around shortly after the manure is applied. So that is one key there. And odors from field application are just very difficult to regulate essentially anyway. So that is why they are not addressed in the odor management plan. Odor management plans establish planning implementation criteria for the act, and the odor plan itself is a site-specific plan that assesses potential odor impacts to an evaluation distance area. Couple components of the odor management plans is an odor site index. That is a detailed index that looks at the various different components of the operation itself when it comes to odor, as well as any neighboring facilities that could be affected by this odor potentially. It also identifies odor management BMPs to manage these impacts. Some common odor management BMPs that we see are windbreak shelter belts. So whether it's a line of trees or even an earthen wall, those are ones that we see probably most commonly to address odor impacts, whether they would be required to be implemented or maybe just supplemental, something that the farmers do an extra. One thing to note that this program is not required to completely eliminate the odors. That would be near impossible. It is just to mitigate the impact of those offensive odors that are going to any neighboring facilities. So the operations that are required to get odor management plans would only be CAOs or CAFOs. I alluded to this in the previous slide. That would be constructing new animal housing or manure storage facilities, or potentially expanding the facility. So if they're building onto an existing freestall, that portion of the expansion would be regulated under this program. Existing facilities or storages and manure application, they are not affected by this program. They would not be regulated. The plans are reviewed and approved by the State Conservation Commission, and they must be approved prior to construction activities commencing. Districts are not currently delegated in the odor management program for mainly two reasons. Reason number one is essentially lack of funding. The odor management program is not widely funded, so we do not have funds to give to districts to implement the program for us. And odor management plans don't exactly create a level playing field amongst the districts. To explain that is some counties will never see an odor management plan in their county, potentially. And then there's counties like Lancaster that would have over 200 operations. So it's not a very level playing field. So it'd be hard to determine who would and would not potentially get delegation. But again, the main reason is it's just not a widely funded program that allows that ability to delegate. We do rely on the districts, however, for education of the odor management program. We do ask them if they are out on a CAO, CAFO, and the operator's talking about potentially building a new barn or manure storage, that they instruct the operator that an odor management plan would be needed. And just a special note, odor management plans, nutrient management plans, the development and implementation should be coordinated on the operation for the maximum benefit. Again, here are some website links for our odor management program. Carl Diamond, he's our odor management coordinator. So lastly, I'm just going to talk about a couple other programs that are at PDA as well and elsewhere. Just very briefly, I think I'm running close to running out of time, so I'll go through these fairly quick. But the first one, we're going to look at PA invasive species. Invasive species is a non-native or exotic species that is not indigenous to the ecosystem and does or likely to cause harm. There are national and state invasive species councils. We have a governor's council here that looks at invasive species within the state. They're charged with the detection, identification, and control of invasive species, and these include aquatic and terrestrial invasive species. And there are a couple links there for the national as well as the Governor's Invasive Species Council. The Pennsylvania Noxious Weed Control Law, that has regulatory authority in the PA Department of Agriculture. Essentially, it is illegal to propagate, sell, or transport noxious weeds on the noxious weed control list. You can see there on the right, there are there's a couple of the many noxious weeds that are on that list. Some of them we definitely do recognize. And for a full list, you can there's that link there that is provided. So Penn State Extension, they help with identification and control recommendations for most of noxious weeds, and then when it comes to any eradication for any infestations, PA Department of Agriculture is the lead on that. And there is some contact information if you would like to contact the Bureau of Plant Industry regarding anything regarding an invasive species. And here are some more helpful links for you. Next, we're going to look at some local nutrient and odor management ordinances. A municipal water quality regulation that cannot that restricts storage, handling, or use of manure fertilizer, or location, construction, or operation of manure storages cannot be more stringent than Act 38. Act 38 essentially limits the local nutrient odor management ordinances that can be imposed. They must be consistent and not more stringent. A good example of that is a municipality or township cannot say all animal operations must obtain an Act 38 nutrient management plan. That would technically be more stringent because only those concentrated animal operations need to obtain an Act 38 nutrient management plan, not all of them. Non-nutrient or non-odor management ordinances are not affected. So if the ordinance is not dealing with application of nutrients or mitigation of odors, those will not be affected. And for any ordinances that do go above and beyond, farmers can challenge those ordinances through request to the Attorney General's office. And that's kind of what I'll talk about here a little bit. With the right to farm law and acre, this limits the establishment of agriculture nuisance suits and ordinances if they're in conflict with normal, customary, or generally accepted farming activities. So a big one that we get a lot of calls about and complaints about is manure spreading, especially as that time of year where farmers are doing a lot of spreading. That is considered a normal and accepted farming activity. So no ordinances could be imposed on spreading of manure. They must follow the requirements of the state when it comes to having the appropriate plan and following the setbacks, but nothing additional can be imposed on them. It excludes farms from public nuisance ordinances. The right to farm law does, unless there is a direct adverse effect on public health and safety. It does protect farms from nuisance actions, but it does not restrict the rights for a neighbor to recover damages. So if a farmer pollutes a neighbor's well and they were not following the proper setbacks, there is a method the neighbor can potentially recover damages for that polluted well. And then the acre law provides farmers with an inexpensive method of challenging local ordinances. They can, in writing, petition to the Attorney General Attorney General's office, and they will take a look at the local ordinance that is imposing any undue constraints on the farmer. You can easily go to the Attorney General's website and just Google Attorney General Acre, and it'll take you right to the website where all Acre is described in more detail, or also the link down below. And you can actually view all of the cases that have been submitted to the Attorney General's office dating back to 2017. I think that's really interesting. You can even look at some of their ultimate rulings on those. And as far as I'm aware, there's only one case that went to the state Supreme Court, and that case essentially upheld the acre portion of Act 38, which was I think a win for the program. And I think lastly here, we're going to just touch on the right to know law. This is something that public offices will have to sometimes deal with. This provides citizens the right to access public records in Pennsylvania. And what determines the documents are deemed a public record. Certain records at the district are subject to public access, including plans, manure management plans, nutrient management plans, odor management plans, if those are maintained there. And it's only documents that exist or in possession of the agency that are accessible. It does not require the creation of a requested record. This is a kind of a hot topic issue I've been experiencing a little bit lately as to what is and is not subject to right to know. And I think essentially one of the easiest answers to give is almost everything is, if your government entity is subject, at least a state or local government entity is subject to right to know. There are very few exemptions in the right to know law that protects what is not a public record. So just keep that in mind whenever conducting business, that especially in the Act 38 program, many of those files and documents are subject to right to know. So the right to know law, it provides access and response process, the how and the when to handle a right to know request. Make sure you're checking with the agency or employer on its public access policy, but keep in mind, like I said, that it does have to. There may be certain policies that your local office may institute, but just know that that doesn't prevent the document from being publicly accessed. And then Beth touched on this earlier regarding Section 1619. The federal government has different requirements when it comes to right to know. Understand that the right to know law is a state-specific law. So with that, we do have a short quiz, but I do see there is a question in chat. Operations that were required to have an odor management plan at construction are expected to maintain those odor BMP. And that is correct. The odor management BMPs that are in the plan when written should be maintained and continue to be implemented throughout the life of the operation. If they withdraw from the program, in order to withdraw from the odor management program, they also have to withdraw from the nutrient management program. Then those odor BMPs do not necessarily need to be maintained. But if they are in the Act 38 program, they must be continuously maintained. So here we just have a short little quiz. I think it's just the easiest method. We can just, if anybody wants to answer them, go ahead and type that into the chat. I don't want to, like I said, I think I'm a little bit over time, so I don't want to take too long. So for number one, when would an Ag E&S plan be required? Does anybody have an answer for that can provide it in the chat, or even just mute yourself? All right, I see an answer of all of the above. I see them coming in. That is correct. For next one, true or false, only CAOs and CAFOs are regulated. What do we think the answer for that one is? Seeing falses come in. That's true. That is accurate, I should say. False would be the answer for that one. All animal operations are regulated in PA one way or the other, whether they are a CEO, CAFO, or just like I said, an animal operation that requires a Chapter 91 manure management plan. So they're all regulated. True or false, with regard to Chapter 105, construction activities cannot proceed until approval or acknowledgement is received from DEP or a delegated conservation district. What do we think the answer is for that one? True. I'm seeing true come in. Yep, that's a true statement there. And lastly, true or false, a local ordinance may be more stringent than Act 38 requirements. What do we think for that one? I'm saying false. That is correct. False is correct for that one. A local ordinance may not be more stringent than Act 38. So if you ever have any questions, feel free. Here are some contact information for local conservation district field reps, as well as my nutrient management regional coordinators and my odor management coordinator. So if you ever have any questions regarding any of this, feel free to reach out. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Tim.
Hey, thanks a lot. I appreciate the great chat. Thank you very much, Brady and Nathan. So with that, we are due for a 15-minute break. That would put us at 10:07. So if you want to check emails, fill up your coffee cup, do whatever else you want in the next 15 minutes, and we will reconvene at 10:07. Thank you very much.
Hey, Tim, are you on?
Hey, yes, I'm here.
Yeah, I logged in, Tim. So is Jen up next?
Jen would be up next. Yes. And then you would be
Okay.
after Jen.
Okay. Very
Hey,
good.
thanks. Thanks a lot, Pete.
We'll see you later. Talk to you later.
Very good. All right, I think we're back. Chris, go ahead and take us to
All
our
right.
next presenter.
Thanks, Tim. Our next presenter is Jen Weld from Penn State. She is going to give a lesson on soil properties, basic soils, how they're formed, and what to look for in the soils. Go ahead, Jen.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Chris. I'm going to share my screen here. Try a different approach. Okay, so everybody should be seeing my slides at this point.
Yep, we're seeing the not the presentation though, Jen.
Just the slides organizer.
There
we go.
There we go.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for having me this morning to kind of go over some of the basics of soils. This presentation was originally produced by or developed by Yuri Plowden with USDA NRCS here in Pennsylvania, our state soil scientist, and I'll be kind of stepping through some of the main concepts of soils, and we'll be reinforcing these when we meet in the field in a few weeks here. Okay, so just some of the basics, what soil is, just by definition or by concept, it's a combination or a mixture of minerals, organic matter, water and air, and it forms on the land surface. Typically, the main function that we often think of when we think of soils is the ability to sustain and support the growth of plants or the production of crops. But there's multiple functions of soils. Becoming much more in the forefront within soil science is the ability of soils to support microorganisms and the important role that microorganisms have, not only in developing physical soil properties, but kind of overall what we refer to as soil health. And there are many different types of soils, and we're going to look a little bit at the soil forming factors to kind of determine why we have these different types of soils. So soils have multiple functions. Soil scientists have different areas that we focus on, different areas that we kind of work in and study, but we all acknowledge and have some knowledge about more generally all of the critical functions of soil. Again, our food production is from soils. Areas that have more productive soils typically have better food sustainability for their populations. Their soils are habitats for soil microorganisms, and this is critically important, and we're going to kind of come back to this as we discuss soils. Our water is filtered by soil. If anybody has a septic tank and a septic field, the ability of soils to filter water, maybe not that we're going to drink again, but to filter water that we drink, is critically important. Soils recycle nutrients. They store a vast amount of carbon, allowing for carbon sequestration, and allow nutrients to be recycled repeatedly as we produce our food and use soils for different functions. One piece that I think is often kind of overlooked or possibly minimized when we talk about soils and the function of soils is that soils are foundations for roadbeds, for engineering, for dams and buildings, and all different types of structures, whether they're occurring in agricultural fields or whether they're occurring in non-agricultural environments. So soils are often important in engineering and engineering applications for different reasons than perhaps soil conservation or agronomic applications, but that function is no less important as we kind of consider soils and soil science as a discipline. So when we talk about soil formation, soils form differently for different reasons. As a result of that, oftentimes soils are more or less suitable for different functions. So we typically consider the unique types of soils. They form under different soil forming conditions or soil forming factors, and we often say it's CLORPT or CLORPT, right? That's oftentimes the acronym that we use, and you can see that here at the bottom of the slide where soil formation as S is a function of CLORP and T. And we're going to look at what CLORP and T stand for. So the 5 soil forming factors are climate, specifically related to temperature and precipitation, relief and landscapes, which is very much connected to topography, organisms or biota. This is where the contribution of microorganisms in soil formation and soil health, but also macroorganisms in soil formation become important, as well as parent material, which is typically reflective of the geology of the area. So these factors, climate, relief, landscapes, organisms, and parent material, are all interacting dynamically together over a period of time. And these are our 5 soil forming factors, or CLORP: climate, organisms, relief, parent material, and time. And these unique combinations and these unique dynamic processes ultimately form the different types of soils that we see not only in Pennsylvania, within the United States, but worldwide. So climate is important when we think about our soil forming factors because soils will develop more rapidly in warm and moist climates and slower in more arid or cold climates. So the type of climate definitely determines how rapidly soils develop. Organisms, whether they're macroorganisms such as worms or groundhogs or other types of burrowing animals, as well as bacteria and fungi or microorganisms, will break down soil particles. They're very important sometimes in physical weathering processes, breaking down soil particles into smaller ones, which influences soil forming factors. So both macro and microorganisms are important when we talk about soil formation. Parent material. As soils form, the traits or the characteristics of the soils that ultimately form are very much informed by the type of parent material that the soils kind of where they start, the parent material that they start from. And parent material can be in place, formed in place, but parent material can also be transported by both water, glaciers, winds, and is very much reflected in the geology of an area. Topography or relief, that's where the soil is kind of on the landscape. Typically, you're going to see deeper soils at the bottom of a hill because of gravity transporting soil materials and sometimes parent material and also water, moving those particles as well. So where the soils are occurring on a hill slope or across the topography often determine how deep or shallow a particular soil is. It can also determine the type of parent material that ultimately the soil forms from. And time. The amount of time that the soil has to form in a specific location will definitely determine how the topography and the parent material and the organisms, as well as the climate, can work together to form the soil. So we often say we have younger soils and we have older soils, and a lot of that has to do with how long time has had for these different dynamic processes to work together to form that soil. So if we look at parent material in Pennsylvania, again, very much connected to geology. Pennsylvania has 6 different what they refer to as physiographic regions. So if we look here at the bottom, let's see if I can get a laser pointer. So we have the Appalachian Plateau, the Ridge and Valley Province. The Appalachian Plateau is in this area, Ridge and Valley Province, and we have the Piedmont Province. These 3 physiographic regions basically make up about 98%, a vast majority of Pennsylvania. But there's 3 smaller provinces that also occur within Pennsylvania. There's the Atlantic Coastal Physiographic Province, the New England Province right in here. And up here along the Lake Erie, we have the Central Lowlands. So where you have these kind of changes in physiographic regions, you're also going to have changes in parent material. You're going to have changes in topography, and you can start to see shifts potentially, or you will see shifts in the types of soils that are going to develop in these areas. So where the soil is developing or occurs on the landscape will also determine how perhaps deep or well developed the soil is. So if you have an upland soil in this area of the landscape, it's generally going to be fairly well developed, meaning we're going to look at horizons in a minute, but it's going to be a more developed soil. You're typically going to have a parent material that forms in place, as opposed to a kind of younger or newer soil that's more weakly developed that might occur in a floodplain. In these cases, oftentimes, water is moving material, you're having more movement of material. The soils are not forming from parent materials that are in place. And then you have these interim areas, often terraces before you reach the floodplain, where there's moderate development, right? Not as well developed as the upland soils, but not as young or under or weakly developed as these floodplain soils. So where understanding the topography of an area will help to inform perhaps what type of soil or what type of soil profile that we're going to look at here in a few minutes you may see in a soil pit that we're going to visit next month. Relief is also important, and how the topography is formed, but specifically how water and soil can move, or water moves. This can help determine where hydric conditions such as wetlands may form. So on a slope, you can have divergent conditions where the water is going to move in a pattern that's away from each other. And you can also have convergent conditions where the water is going to move such that it moves towards each other, right? So when you have these areas that are convergent, where the water is converging, these are generally where you're going to see hydric conditions, and oftentimes where you're going to see wetlands forming. So you're going to have soils that are a bit wetter. The soil formation processes are going to be different. The types of organisms that are going to exist in the soil in these wetter areas are going to be different. So, this relief and how the water moves and how the topography kind of how the land lies, so to speak, is very much going to be an influence on how the soil is going to form. So when we look at soil itself and the composition of soil, you have about 50% pore space and about 50% solids. Of the pore space, you want about 25% water and 25% air. And for the solids, generally 45% mineral and 5% organic matter. This is an ideal breakdown of the pore space and the soil solids, but it's about 50% and 50%. So when we look at that 5% organic matter, why is that organic matter important? Organic matter influences both physical and chemical properties of soil. Organic matter definitely improves the physical properties and physical condition of the soil. It can inform or contribute to soil structure, which in turn allows for better root growth of crops, better crop stability, but it also very much contributes to the ability of the soil to hold water. Right here we see, the organic material is going to increase water infiltration because you have better soil structure, but you're also going to have better water holding capacity. You're also going to have improved soil tilth because there's going to be better uniformity of soil aggregates for the plant, and because of the plant animal mineral residues. So the integration or the incorporation of soil organic matter into that 50% solids is critically important for the physical condition and the structure of the soil, which allows for better plant growth and also improved soil tilth. So when we think about organic matter, there's a living portion and there's also a dead portion of organic matter. I mean, we often think of the living portion. We don't think of the dead organic matter as much, but they're equally important. So when we look at the living portion, that's usually your microorganisms and typically bacteria and fungi, but it's also your macroorganisms. It's insects, it's earthworms, it's the burrowing animals that are all working in the soils together to break down the manures and the crop residues that are being applied. Also, the microorganisms produce sticky substances or exude sticky substances, specifically fungi. Earthworms can as well. And these, often known as glomalin, can bind soil particles together. And what this allows is for a better soil structure, more stable soil aggregates. So, the living organisms within soil are critically important in determining the physical structure and the physical properties of the soil. But there's also dead organic matter. As microorganisms and macroorganisms die, manures are applied, there is a decay process. And in that decay process, there's a release of nutrients. There's also the release of food and nutrients for the living microorganisms, kind of that nutrient cycling that we discussed just a little bit in the introduction. And this process is also building soil structure and contributing to the soil organic matter. So you're really seeing a cycling of nutrients and different parts of organic matter through this living and dead portion, of the organic matter itself. So there are organic soils that have an organic horizon. These organic horizons are going to be primarily decomposed organic materials. The least kind of decomposed organic soils are often known as peat. Then you also have a muck, which is your most decomposed soil. And this is an image. You can see they're very dark soils. It's mostly organic material in these organic type soils. But there's also mineral soils. And typically when we're working in agricultural sections of the landscape or portions of the landscape, we're working mostly with mineral soils, meaning that they have mineral horizons. Their primary composition is some percentage or combination of sand, silt, and clay. And within that, there's different amounts of organic matter, depending on how the soil is being managed, but also where and how the soil is formed, what type of native vegetation may be there. So all of those pieces work together. So soils, specifically mineral soils, they have a texture, and that texture is made up of sand and silt and clay. Sand is typically very visible. It's going to be coarse. It's going to be gritty. If you pick up the soil, you're going to be able to see those sand-sized particles and feel them in your hand. Silt is, you're going to require a visual aid, typically a little more than a magnifying glass, to see silt in a soil. It's not like sand, but it has a very unique feel to it. When you put soil in your hand, and you can see here, this person has a silty soil in their hand, and they're making what's referred to as a ribbon. And you can feel this kind of smooth, flowery texture when you have a soil that's high in silt content. And then clay. Clay, you're only going to see clay particles with an electron microscope. You definitely need the aid of a microscope to see clay particles. They're less than 0.002 millimeters in size. However, if you again have a wetted soil in your hand and you make what's referred to as a ribbon here, it's going to be stiff and it's going to be sticky, just kind of like what you think of with a clay, or a clay that you may use in applications outside of soil pits and in soil science in general. So these are the three components of soil texture: sand, silt, and clay. All soils have these components except for organic soils, which have your organic horizons in some combination of percentage. And the tool that we use to determine soil texture and subsequently determine soil textural classes is called the soil textural triangle. So you need to know your percent sand, your percent clay, and your percent silt in order to determine what soil textural class a particular soil falls into. How we determine those percentages, there's a variety of different ways to do that. There's a field method, which is known as the ribbon method, where you can estimate different percentages specifically of clay, and then estimate silt and sand. There are also laboratory methods using hydrometer, where you can measure the percent sand, percent clay, and percent silt, and then use the soil textural triangle to determine what textural class that soil falls into, which is very important when we kind of classify or organize soils according to taxonomy, which helps inform how suitable a soil is for some of the different functions that we discussed earlier. So in addition to texture, soils have pore space. Coarser textured soils, which are typically going to have more sand, have less pore space, but they have more macropores. So they have overall less pore space, but they have these larger pores, which can often lead to what's referred to as preferential flow of water down through these macropore areas. Where finer textured soils that are going to have less sand and perhaps more silt and clay may have more total pore space, but they have fewer of these macropore areas. So therefore, they're less likely to have these areas of preferential flow where water moves rapidly through these macropore areas. So how water is retained and subsequently moves through a soil is determined both by texture and by pore space, partially by texture and pore space. But soils also have a structure, and soil structure is really the arrangement of soil particles, and what's often referred to as PEDs, or individual, I guess you could, I think is referred to as clumps, small clumps, but small PEDs of soil here, right? And how those are arranged in a soil has implications, a lot of different implications, but also affects how soil moves through and into a soil. There we go. So there are a variety of different types of soil structure. Probably some of the more common soil structures that you'll see. Granular soil structure, this typically occurs in the soil surface. If you ever have picked up a plant that has roots and then has soil, you can see soil PEDs or clumps attached to those roots. That would be an example of a granular soil structure. That's probably the most typical visual that is used to describe granular. Clady is also a very common soil structure that you'll see near the surface of a soil, especially if there is compaction. Oftentimes, soil structure can change. Soil structure can change with management. And one change that you can see is the development of a platy soil structure. It looks like plates. You kind of see it here stacked on top of each other when there's soil compaction. You'll often see prismatic or blocky as you move down into the moderate depths of the soil. When you kind of break the soil up in your hand into what was referred to as PEDs, you're going to start to see that those PEDs look more either blocky or more like columns or more like prisms. And massive is kind of a very specific soil structure that is associated with parent material. So parent material is typically going to be below in the deeper areas of the pit, and we're going to look at some soil horizons here that'll describe it a bit better. But typically, that has a massive structure. There's been minimal impact on the parent material of these soil forming factors, such as organisms and climate. So it still kind of has this massive soil structure to it. So when you look at one particular function, which is crop production, typically a granular, loamy textured soil makes the best soil structure kind of texture combination. And as I mentioned, if you have compaction, you're generally not going to change the texture of your soil, but you have the potential to change the structure of your soil, moving it from kind of this granular structure to a more platy structure, which influences how both nutrients but also water moves through the soil. So in addition to structure and texture, soils also have different colors to them, and colors are extremely important when you're looking at soils. They give you a lot of clues and a lot of information about the soils, including the soil's mineral content, the amount of organic matter. The more organic matter, the darker those soils are going to be, a really dark brown or black color. Soils that are high in iron typically are like a deep orange or yellowish brown. And as we look at soils and we look at soils at different depths, how the soil color changes can also give us indications about how water is moving or not moving through a soil. So soils that generally have brighter colors, kind of like those oranges and those yellows, are bright yellows and reds, are typically well drained. Soils that are very dull in color, a lot of grays and muted yellows and reds, are typically wetter soils where water is present in the soil and kind of stays in the soil, is retained in the soil for a period of time. And this is a really nice illustration of that, where you can see there's a lot of gray areas here. This is what's referred to as redox formations, meaning that there's water here, and the state of the iron is changing within the soil because of the amount of time the water is present in the soil. So generally, soils that are well drained, that have adequate aeration. When we look at that pore space, there's a balance between water and air. That 50% pore space, there's a balance between water and air, are going to be very bright in color. Yellows, browns, reds, and the iron is oxidized, so it's in an oxidized form. When you have poor aeration, where you may have an imbalance in that pore space, where you have more water than air, you're going to have very dull colors like we saw here. These duller grays, blues, is a very good indication just by looking at those changes in colors or looking for those areas that we call mottles or redox formations, where you kind of see these grays intermixed with some of these brighter colors, is an indication that this area of a soil or the soil in general is poorly drained. So the soil color can tell you quite a bit about drainage on the farm. So this is a good example here. You can see this particular, what was referred to as a soil profile. You can see here's the soil surface, and you move down through kind of the depths. So this would be a soil pit, as referred to the soil profile. You're seeing very bright colors. So you're seeing the oranges and the reds and the yellows. Over here, this particular soil profile, very dull, lots of muted yellows, grays, and blues. This is an indication of poor drainage, where this would be an indication of, a well-drained soil. Oftentimes, you'll see this occurring at different points in the landscape, with the well-drained soils being a bit more upslope, and often the poorly drained soils could be closer to a water resource. In this case, it looks in this photo as if there may be, a stream present there. So soil color is measured in a specific way. We use what's referred to as a Munsell color book, and we'll be using these in the field. And we use the Munsell color book to look at hue, value, and chroma. And this is an example of a page from the Munsell color book. So hue is the kind of this is the color of the soil. Is it red? Is it yellow red? Is it yellow? And that's kind of our first piece of information that we use to determine what page of the color chart we're going to start with, is what color is the soil. Value is our second piece of information, and this is the amount of light that's being reflected from the soil. So, it's the lightness or darkness of the color. It is the same for all pages of the Munsell color book, and it ranges basically from 2.5 up until 8. And then you have chroma, and this is kind of how pure the color is or how vibrant the color is. And this is where you get into assessing the color, how gray is the color? Is it a very gray kind of red, or does it have a very good strength of color where it's a true red color? And this is the last piece of information that you report with a soil color. So a soil color would be reported as 7 YR, then 5 for your value, and 8 for your chroma, where 7 YR is your hue. And we'll look at this in the field, but there is a standardized way and a standardized reference for, determining soil color, which is very important when you're looking at drainage status in agricultural soils. The soils are arranged. We typically refer to this as an illustration of a soil profile, and soils are arranged, organized by horizons, right? We describe our soils as different layers or horizons. Typically, you're going to have an A horizon. The A horizon is near the surface. You're going to have a B horizon, which is kind of, in the middle. And then you're going to have a C horizon. And the C horizon is typically your parent material. And this is, again, the structure of your parent material is going to be massive. The C horizon has had minimal impact by the different soil forming factors. So if we look at our major horizon designations, you have an O horizon, which may or may not be present. This is going to be a surface organic layer. Then you have an A horizon. That's going to be your surface mineral layer. This is a soil surface. You're going to have your B horizon, which is your subsoil. Your C horizon, which is going to be your parent material. And then you have an R horizon, which is your bedrock. Not all soils have all, or soil profiles have all horizons. Some soils only have a few horizons, some have multiple horizons. It really depends on how well the soil has been developed. And we saw kind of at some of the beginning slides is where the soil is on the landscape. Kind of the upland areas versus the floodplain areas can determine how well developed the soil is. And how well developed the soil is often determines how many horizons are present. So when we look at how we're going to determine or describe a soil profile or describe a soil, we look at determining where horizons are by looking at changes in soil color and soil texture, where roots are present, how far the roots penetrate down into the soil, where the soil structure changes, how rock fragment percentage changes, and also the presence of mottling or redoxomorphic or redox features. There are those kind of intermixed gray and reddish orange features that indicate that there's a presence of water within the soil profile. So we're just going to step through some of the horizons. We're going to look at these in the field when we look at our soil pits and our soil horizons. So the O horizon is mostly organic matter. It's going to be right at the surface, right up here. Your A horizon is going to be your first mineral horizon. It can also be a zone of organic matter accumulation. This particular A horizon, kind of right here, is very clear. It has a very what's referred to as abrupt boundary. It's very different than the B horizon. This could be what's referred to as A horizon with a plow layer. If there has been some plowing done in the past, it looks like it's mostly grass now. But it has a very abrupt kind of boundary. I didn't mention this before, but there can be E horizons. Not all soils have an E horizon, and an E horizon is an area of loss. This is an area that's going to be, you can see it right here, it's going to be lighter in color. Here's another good example of an E horizon between an A and a B horizon. It's lighter in color, and it's known as a zone of alluviation. Basically, you're losing clay and iron and aluminum, and therefore you have a lighter color for the soil as compared to your A horizon, that upper mineral horizon, and your B horizon. So if your E horizon, if it's present, is an area of loss, your B horizon is usually a zone of accumulation. In this horizon, you're going to be accumulating iron, aluminum, calcium carbonate, salts, and clays. It's going to be a difference typically in texture. This is where you're looking at more of your blocky textures, possibly your prismatic textures, and it's going to be below the A horizon and below the E horizon. The C horizon, this is typically going to be, this is a very good example of it right here, it's going to be your parent material. There's little impact of the soil forming factors, little biological activity, and the soil texture is typically going, the soil structure is typically going to be massive. So the last piece that we're going to look at is drainage classes. Drainage class is often an interpretation that is used to determine like the frequency and duration of wetness conditions under which a soil is formed. Often it is referred to directly as the depth to mottling, which is again those redoxomorphic features. But drainage class is an interpretation. We use it frequently in Pennsylvania, but it is an interpretation of these other pieces of information about soils, such as describing the different horizons, soil color, soil texture, are brought together to determine drainage classes, which are often used in agricultural management, in Pennsylvania. So there's different drainage classes: excessively drained, somewhat excessively drained, well drained, moderately well drained, somewhat poorly drained, and very poorly drained. Different, specifically moderately well drained, can have some redoxomorphic features, even though they're indicating that there's water present, but it's not present in most of the soil horizon. When you get into somewhat poorly drained, and very poorly drained, you're definitely going to have presence of those what's referred to as mottles when you look at the soil color. So we will be looking at drainage class and the implication of drainage class when we look at the soil pits. So I wanted to make sure that I brought that up. Again, emphasizing that this is an interpretation of those other kind of principles about soil structure, soil color, soil texture that we look at in soil color than we look at when we describe and understand soils. So the last kind of piece here is if we look at these drainage classes and we look at the depth to that modeling, or where we would expect to see kind of those gray models where we have an indication of redoxomorphic features in water, the more well-drained the soil is, the deeper the depth is typically to where you're starting to see indications of modeling. As I said, even in well-drained soils, if you go deep enough, down 36 inches, you're going to see some indication that water is present in the soil for an extended period of time because of those models. But in a poorly drained soil, it's going to be very close to the surface. And when that's very close to the surface, that interferes with root development and therefore with the ability of plants to thrive and crops to thrive. So with that, I'm looking forward to working with everybody in the field in the next few weeks. I think I'll be visiting with you again in another virtual day, but looking forward to kind of putting these principles into practice. And thank you again for having me this morning.
Hey, thanks so much, Jen. We'll look forward to hearing from you more, and definitely the activity in the field will be a lot of fun. So thank you very much. We have one more presenter for today, and that presenter is Pete Vanderstappen. Pete is a retired NRCS state engineer. I think he's up to what, 48 or 49 years of conservation work. Pete, it's up there, right?
So yeah, it's creeping up there, but that's okay. I'm younger every day. Younger every day.
Pete loves what he does so much that he keeps on working, and we appreciate that. And so, Pete, I'm going to hand it over to you to take us home with the final presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. As Tim said, I've worked with soil conservation service when I started back in the late 70s, and with NRCS in Pennsylvania, probably over 40 years, and spent a lot of time doing ag waste type stuff, dam building, and mushroom country stuff all over the place. So lots of experience, and hopefully we'll give you some insights on the items to consider during the planning process. So I'm going to share my screen now. Let's see if it pops up here. Okay, Tim, do you see my screen yet?
I see it.
Very good. I don't have it set up to see myself and all that kind of stuff. I'm using a different method, but we're good. So for the next probably only 20 minutes or so, we're going to talk a little bit about items to consider during the planning process. So an overview. So you folks are probably all new to the planning process, unless you work with NRCS or SCS somewhere else. You're new to the game. I think each one of you is going to bring some interesting background. Each one of you might have a shorter history or longer history of your experiences in the world. And now you're going to be working with, whether it's a SCS or conservation districts or DEP, you're going to be asked to go out to sites and identify and verify resource concerns, I think is the biggest thing, and slowly start the process of coming up with solutions or options for that producer or landowner. A couple key things to think about. Your plan must consider the rest of the operation. Sometimes we get the tunnel vision on, we see a problem and we're going to worry about that and come up with solutions, but that solution probably has to be integrated with the rest of the operation. It just can't be a solution for that. It's got to fit within that particular operation. Sometimes you're going to run into producers that they're unaware of the regulations and the issues that are enabling that. So I say, be nice. I plan to educate. We're out there to educate producers that may not know that they are causing problems, or they know they're a problem, but they don't know why it's a problem. So, be ready to do some education on that. There's a great presentation earlier in this training session. Of course, from NRCS, even conservation districts and all the different regulatory folks, if you're doing any kind of practices, they're going to meet the Field Office Tech Guide. And certainly we try to work best we can to meet all the regulatory requirements and then fit all that, combine all that within the producer's operation. So it's quite a challenge. And then the last thing I have on this page is that change is often part of the solution. And that's also sometimes the toughest thing, because folks sometimes need to change in order to get into compliance. So here's some more general thoughts. management changes can often solve issues without spending a lot of dollars. So I think that's critical as, economics at different levels of farms out there. Some farmers seem to have more money than others, but there are a lot of cases where if you're doing a planning process and you have a resource concern, sometimes a simple change in management can solve that problem without spending buku dollars on waste storage or some other facility. Maybe an example would be a guy's feeding 5 beef cows next to the stream with a hay bale of sorts. He can move that hay feeding system up the hill to the northern end of the pasture and probably resolve that issue of having a direct runoff into the stream. So sometimes little management changes can solve issues without spending a lot of money. When you're going out there, it's always, you got to think when you're going out there, take a look at the weather. If you're out there on a nice sunny day looking at issues, how's the same plot of land or view going to look in the middle of the winter or after it rains for 2 weeks? So all those kind of things kind of play in the back of your mind. You have a snapshot of what things look like at that moment, but how are things going to look in different times of the year? Here's an interesting one. When a solution is based upon the owner's idea, it will have a greater chance of implementation and being maintained. So there are some schools of thought out there. If maybe the farmer has some ideas, maybe he understands, yes, I have a problem with manure runoff or this erosion in the field, and he might have an idea, or she might have an idea of how to solve that. If somehow you can work our standards and practice into his solution, then the buy-in for that solution is much better. And the odds are that once it's implemented, it's going to be maintained because the farmer had buy-in on top of that. He wasn't told you must do this and do it that way. So, if somehow you can work the conversation such that with the farmer's ideas can be incorporated into the solution and meet the standards, that's really a good thing. Solutions promoted or implemented in the past may not be acceptable for today's standards and regulatory world. Standards change. And like Tim said, I've been working for 30 years, and when I go out in the field sometimes, I see some of the stuff that we built 15 years ago. And yeah, that was the state of the art at that point in time. But today that would not be the state of art, and we would think of different solutions to handle that same problem. So farmers may have an old system out there that worked perfectly fine for them at the time. Their operation has changed and the regulations have changed. So some of the good old stuff in the past probably is not the good old stuff in the future. So just keep that in mind. And I think that the challenge is for a lot of us with working with these farms and stuff is we come up with some new ideas. It sometimes takes a while for a producer or client to come to grips with understanding or accepting those ideas. And then they go out and do some more research on it. And they go to their neighbor's farm or wherever. And all of a sudden you think you have it solved. And then one thing happens on their operation and you need to start the planning process over. So be always prepared for that. A good example would be a farm that has a partnership with 2 brothers farming together and the one brother passes away. Maybe they're not going to go stay in the farming anymore. So all of a sudden their plans and how they want to do the future has changed significantly. So always be aware of that. That's just part of the things to consider during the planning process you're going to run into. So this lovely scale here. Hey, Tim, can you see my arrow on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is kind of a summary of a couple different things here and just some big things to think about. So on the left-hand side, I have the animal, plants, soil, water, air, energy, human. Those are the general concept areas we're looking at in the planning process. We're looking at what kind of animals that farm has, how many, what size, where they're located, all the different things about that particular operation and their animals, whether they have 7 cows or 500 cows or 1,000 cows. Plants, plant materials, what kind of plants, what kind of cropping systems they have on the farm, soybeans, corn, different grains, all that kind of thing, all play a factor into what's going on in some of the planning that you're going to be doing. Soils, I love the fact that Jen mentioned soils are for engineering too, and certainly from the engineering side, we look at soils not from growing crops, but more of a stability. Can we build our storage or our buildings on top of these soil? Do they can they stand the weight and all that kind of stuff? And we also look at the fact that if we have lots of limestone and rock outcrops and those kind of things, those may be areas we will try to avoid to save the producer money and cost. Air quality, water is a big one. You know, where's the water running to? How's that affecting soils? You know, all that really plays a big factor in some of the things that you're going to do planning is where's the water sources? Where's the water flowing? Is there water on the property? Maybe there's no water in the property. Do they use wells? You know, all those kind of things play into. Air is probably a new one. You know, you hear today about the idea of climate change, and certainly USDA is out there talking about climate change and really trying to work with agriculture to, you know, reduce greenhouse gas and those kind of things. But we're also thinking about, you know, just general air quality. And for most of our exposure to the ag producers, you know, so the question is, does your farm smell? You know, a dairy operation may have a certain lower level of odor, but if you generate a hog farm, that's probably going to generate more odors. Duck farms might generate a lot more odors, depends on your experience, but certainly air quality from the odor point is one thing. And then you could also get into extremely dry conditions and big lots and stuff where you could have dust blowing off animal lots and those kind of things. And of course, you could have dust coming off of poor conservation on your land, those kind of things. Energy is another one we think about all the time is energy for the cost of lighting, running equipment, those kind of things. It's kind of a low priority, but in some cases with new LEDs and stuff, you know, energy costs are pretty high at a farm. Like a 300-cow dairy can have a $5,000 or $6,000 per month electric bill, and if they can come up with some means of reducing mechanical ventilation and go with natural ventilation, they can save themselves several $1,000s a month. The last on that corner over there is the human and cultural thing, and that's always a challenge. You know, we have a variety of ag producers in Pennsylvania, and these different groups, you know, the English, the Mennonite, the Amish, each of these groups have their particular cultural things they do and plan to do, and you have to factor that into your planning process. So you get all those steps over there. The top of the page, I said, you know, I mentioned the 9 steps of planning. You're going to hear about that, I'm sure, more times than you wish, but we're kind of in steps 1, 2, and 3 today. You heard some great sections over there about environmental regulations. You know, there's all kinds of things out there, and certainly each one of us is not going to be an expert to know all the rules. And I guess from NRCS point of view, you know, the landowner in the end is responsible for their property and meeting those regulations. But in the planning process, we certainly try to help those farmers out and try to give them the best they can until they actually talk to regulatory people for final determinations. Utilities, underground utilities, above ground, you know, those kind of things can affect the layout of what you're doing or what you plan to do. If there's a buried gas line down the middle of the field, how's that going to affect the layout of a waterway or cutting a diversion over it? So utilities is a big thing. Economic cost. Certainly, in the last couple of years, with economic inflation being as high as it is, our costs for conservation implementation has I hate to say skyrocketed, has really jumped up. You know, I remember back in the day in the early 80s, we would cost your farmers $1,500 to a couple $1,000s to build a manure storage. Imagine that, $2,000 or $3,000. Now, most facilities are running, you know, from $150,000 to $200,000. So, economic cost is a big consideration. That when you're working with a producer to do a plan, and in that plan, you're going to implement some different practices. You know, the cost of implementation is weighing on the back of all producers, and certainly looking at opportunities to get funding, whether it's from NRCS, conservation districts, or other groups. You know, those are all the challenging part of this planning process. Of course, you have the NRCS planning policies, you know, that can affect how the NRCS staff plan. I put down here farm layout. Every farm has a different layout, and the layout of the farm may affect the planning process on where you can do certain things. You would love to build a manure storage here, but you can't put it there because of the way the layout of the operation is or whatever. Lower left is limited time. So you're writing plans and different type of plans, but at some point in time, you need to produce a product. You need to write so many plans a year as a goal. Like I talked about goals, You have your personal goals, who you're working for, your local office, state office, and national. So you're trying to write all these plans, and you are always under the gun and said, hey, I got to write 2 conservation plans or an Act 38 plan, whatever. You have to write these plans, and you need to get these things done. So it's a kind of why I have it in the middle. Planning is a balancing act, and it generates a lot of challenges for you folks to think about in that whole process. And the type of plan will affect your focus. I probably didn't list them all here, but certainly grazing plan, conservation plan, nutrient management plan, and ag waste management plan, E&S control plan, irrigation plan, Act 38 plan, others. There's all kinds of different plans depending on your role within your agency or district or whatever organization you're working for. You might be writing a specific plan, but all those plans, we'll go back here, have to incorporate all these kind of items and planning considerations that all blend together. And the grazing plan needs to maybe match up with the ag waste management plan. You can't write one plan, ignore what's going on in the rest of the farm. So they need to be integrated. And I'll give you one quick example. Let's say I'll pick on Lancaster County. If a farmer has it's been determined that a farmer has a 3-acre pasture with 50 cows on it, and it's an ACA. And they said, well, okay, you can't have 50 cows in that pasture as an ACA. You need to keep that as a pasture. And the simple solution is, okay, we're going to keep the cows off the pasture. They're only going to go out there, 1 hour a day, so we can maintain the green view and limit the nutrients and all those kind of things. Well, now these cows are not on the pasture; they're up on the barnyard. Well, all of a sudden, their 3-month manure storage is going to be too small. So by writing a plan to solve his resource concern on his quote ACA now pasture, to solve that problem, moving the animals up on the concrete lot there generates another issue where his manure storage may be too short. The 3 months might not be long enough to cover the season while the plants are growing. He has nowhere else to spread the manure. So just keep those things in mind, that when you write a plan for one thing, there's always a possibility that plan may have a ripple effect on something else. So that's why you got kind of look at everything when you go out there. You're just not looking and focusing, targeting specifically on your specific plan. You got to look at the rest of the operation. So just some general stuff I call preparation for planning. Research the property history. If it's known, there's many cases where if you're in an NRCS office, even a conservation district, certain clients we go out to a lot, you may be the new person on the block. There's probably a file folder in the file or electronic file somewhere that there's a lot of history in that site. And take a look at that stuff, take a look at it, read up on it, those kind of things. Maybe someone in office can help you out. They've been out that farm before and give you some little insight on what you're running into, what kind of a person you're dealing with and those kind of things. Here's another one. If you're totally unfamiliar with the type of operation, so you can either go to the Ag Waste Field Management Handbook, and there's a lot of good chapters in there about different type of operations, or for maybe for the younger folks, explore some YouTube videos on these type of operations. And I remember about a year ago, I was asked to help a field office here in Lebanon about a sheep operation. And my background, I was raised on a 40-cow dairy farm. My relatives still do dairy cows and all that kind of stuff, but don't have much experience on sheep. And I've worked with some grazing folks over the years, but I went on YouTube. I think I looked at about 4 different YouTube clips about this lady that's raising, 200 sheep. And the whole process she went through, and the grazing process and all that kind of thing. Pretty cool stuff. Yeah, it took 20 minutes per video, and watched 3 or 4 videos. But boy, I kind of got a background on what's going on before I went out to this young farmer who was talking about getting more sheep and doing things. So it's easier to at least listen and hear what they have and what they plan to do. But now you have some pretty good background knowledge, just some general stuff and what these operations look like and what you're getting into. So, and then you can ask them maybe more questions, because what you all find out is almost all producers, they think their operation is the right way to do things, and they certainly will ask good questions. They'll explain why they do what they do. The neighbor may do something else, and that's fine, but in the planning process, you need to find out how they do things, and then that, with all these other issues, you definitely need to look into. So I talked about reviewing aerial information, soil information, and what I'm going to do, here's my example project. So the landowner has issue with stormwater at his or her site. You get contact information. You don't know the property lines, you at least know the address, and here's some things you could look at. So here's on the right-hand side where the red circle is, that's the property. They're building I think it's a small, I've never been to this place. I drive up 72 here. There's a little building. You can see by looking at the aerial photography here, I see a bunch of things. There's a building here. I look back in 2019, there's no building here. It looks like there's a little bit of erosion going down through here. And the newer photo on the right here, the 2022, doesn't show it as much, but I also do see, looks like a little bit of a stream coming up through, and here's a pond that's flowing down through here. So I really didn't think, I wouldn't see that from the road. I'll show it in a second. But so here I got an idea. Here's the building. Here's some brown lots here. I can see some, because I know that looks like some drainage through there. So, it's kind of like, well, why do they have a drainage issue? Well, I can see some stuff just on the aerial to start with. So it's good background information. And then as you get it's probably more on the technician side or the engineering side, but we do have another one. You can go to USGS stream. Ooh, I misspelled that. Stream stats, forgot the R. Anyway, but on stream stats, you can identify this property, and it can automatically delineate the watershed. But now I know that there's a pretty good sized watershed flowing down through the property. And, just off the side of it, we have this, ACA going on, which doesn't show in this particular picture, but there's definitely something going on here, and it would run right into that stream. So just another way to kind of do some background checking, or after you would go out to the site, you can always go back and look at this kind of stuff. That's another source. Probably old school. Maybe you guys won't do this, but I certainly look at the old USGS maps, get some contour lines, get some ideas which way the grade's going, and which way things are flowing. Here's a pond. Looked at the stream, and in the property, there's the house up there, so it's right in this area here. So it looks like there's a swale coming down through here. So, combination thing kind of gives you a better perspective on what you're going to go look at. With crazy technology and Google and that kind of thing, here's a street view off of 72. So that's pretty cool. I can look through right time of year, and I can see the building out there. I can see little patches of brown in here. There's a barn, the old original barn up there. Certainly give you an idea what you're looking at, before you even get there. Certainly, Jen, great presentation there on soils. And I will say, Jen, every time I listen to soils presentations, I learn something new. So that's always a good thing, even for a semi-retired engineer. But you can get soils information from PA Soil Web, and it's delineated. I guessed the property. Like I said, didn't know anything about the property. At least I guessed the property. Now I can take a look at it's Bennington, Berks, Holly. It's a wetter soil down here, and Weichert. So I think one of the things that each of you will do over time is, as you write, especially for running conservation plans or any kind of nutrient management plans, get to know your soil types in that field office that you're working in. And by knowing the soil types up front, when you look at a plan, you put a map together, you can automatically say, oh boy, I got the wetter soils down here, some highlights, probably some wet areas down here. I got some really good productive soils up here. Those all things are kind of good background information. So when you go up to the farmer and say, hey, that field across the road over there, is there a wet spot over in the one corner there? And the farmer goes, oh yeah, how do you know that? Well, you look at the soils map and you figure it out, that way. So getting information out of the soil survey and stuff is background information, can be great stuff to have. And starting a conversation with landowner in part of the planning process. But my next to the last slide here, we're gonna get done early today, Tim, is be ready for the field. We're talking about items to consider during the planning process. You need to be ready to go out to the field. I don't know, there's 30 or 40 people on here, and some have a lot of experience and some don't, but appropriate clothing, bug spray, sunscreen, proper footwear. I remember been 20 years ago, we had a young lady come in for the summer, and we're going out to do crop fields and grain field, whatever. And I came out in sandals, and walking through this field with a recently cut grain was not good on her sandals. So, or if you're going to have to walk through cow manure, you should have the appropriate boots and stuff like that. On the left-hand side there, biosecurity is a big thing. Maybe the dairy folks don't think of it as much, but certainly if you're going out to a hog operation or something like that, and you actually want to go in the hog barn, if you get permission, you have to shower in, shower out, and those kind of things. So most cases, we avoid going into hog facilities and poultry facilities and those kind of things. We stay on the outside. I saw this interesting, I grabbed this one on the left lower corner there. It says, keep gate closed, no matter what the goats tell you. I think it's a little funny there, but certainly if we're walking around folks' property and got permission there, they may be with me or are not with us, but certainly if we open the gate, we leave the gate the same way we found it. I forgot to put on here, find out if you're on a dairy or beef operation, you want to go out and walk the pasture and those kind of things, which is important in running a grazing plan. Probably need to find out whether there's any bulls out there and where they're at. So don't want to be chased down by a bull. Clipboard and our notepad to document discussion and collect information. Always good to have. Got to write things down because I can't remember everything. For those working on and we'll do that during boot camp too, we'll talk about the CNMP engineering inventory worksheet. It's mainly for headquarters, but it's a logical sequence to document a lot of information so that you have, the other thing is, as part of you're writing all these plans, you want to be efficient as possible, and you want to try to gather up all the information in one trip out. You're going to forget a few things maybe, but certainly writing things down and going through a checklist to make sure that you gather all the information you need to start writing a plan is fundamental versus having to drive back out to the farm. Maybe it's only 10 minutes away from the office, but it could be an hour and a half away. So be comprehensive when you're out there. Photos, digital photos, I think most farmers get permission on that, and certainly it's a great way to document good things. And from the NRCS point of view, we're always looking for pictures for good practices, but we also need photos, obviously, for things that aren't quite 100% right, or it reminds us of, you take a picture of a barn above an ACA or something, and there's no roof gutters on, or the roof gutters are in poor condition. You take a photo of it. You may not remember that 2 weeks from now, but you can certainly go back through your photo and say, oh, there, the roof gutters are missing, or the roof gutter and the downspouts aren't connected. So some things like that. So photos are really a good thing. We talked about biosecurity. We have the NRCS typical is you're going to wear boots, wash your boots, those kind of things, go out the farm. But sometimes farms may have additional biosecurity requirements that we need to meet, or we're just going to decide to avoid them. And if we have a major outbreak of some poultry influenza or avian flu and those avian whatever, we're probably going to avoid by not even going out to those places. The last one I think is an interesting one too, is follow biosecurity rules for vehicle usage. So one, if you're going out to, I think we have in some cases for chicken operation, we only get to one chicken operation a day. Even though you're not going to the chicken barn and those kind of things, your clothes might get exposed from the ventilation, whatever, but at least you're not going to multiple farms on one day and you're changing your clothes every day, all that kind of stuff. So there's opportunities to limit those kind of things. So make sure you're following the guidance on that so you're really prepared to go out in the field. Other resources. So, we talked about, of course, I'm from the engineering side, Chapter 2, Part 651, Agriculture Waste Management Field Handbook, Planning Considerations. That is a great chapter that focuses on the planning aspects for doing an ag waste management plan. Number one, maybe I didn't list very definitively where to find this stuff, but this is all in NRCS e-directives. It's a public site. It just been updated recently. And you have to go on there and go to the handbooks and do a couple clicks to get into that. If you don't know how to get there, ask somebody from NRCS to help you out, get in the process. But there's certainly a lot of background resource reading tools that you could use to get some background information. Especially if you have very little awareness of these different types of operations, that's a great planning thing to look at and get some more information. There's Chapter 9 Ag Waste Management Systems. That's a whole book on all kinds of ag waste management systems. And I show you a little clip here on the lower corner. It just shows, they try to go through the process of what a typical beef operation would be like, or typical dairy. Just some good general background. If you're unfamiliar with these kind of operations, it makes sense to go back in this particular book and read up on those subjects. So at least you have a little bit of background. When you go out to the producer, they're going to tell you how they are doing things. And then you're in the process of looking at potential resource concerns and all those kind of things. But I think it's going to really help you understand the particular farm's operation, maybe the jargon associated with that particular animal industry. Those kind of things are going to be helpful. Training, what you're doing here today, take opportunities to go to all the training you can. I think that you're always going to pick up something. It's not a day to take a vacation. It's a day to pick up a few things and also interact with other folks in the same way, right? Fellow staff. Most folks, you're not working by yourself in an office. You have multiple people with more experience, so they're generally helpful and willing to help you out or answer some simple questions and give you some training. And certainly, as a new person, you're going to be going out with these other people, maybe just listening for the first time or two, but certainly an opportunity to pick up some transfer some knowledge in that conversation, riding down the road and back between farms, and just listening to what's going on. Other agency folks, you're working for Conservation District or NRCS or DEP or whoever, you're going to interact with other regulatory folks and you're going to hear their version of what they are concerned about and those kind of things. But these are all good things to consider as you're trying to work through the consideration process, as you're trying to go through this very complicated planning process. Like I said, owner-operator is a big thing. YouTube, National Planning Handbook. There's all kinds of other outside resources that can help you in this process. And then, of course, any of those, we mentioned Act 38, all those particular plans that you're writing, they also have their scripted manuals and what they want and give guidance on that. And they provide examples and those kind of things. So there's all kinds of opportunities out there to get some good training and learn about all the different things you need to consider in the planning process. And Tim, with that, I'm done rambling on. I hope I covered some good topics here, and I had no quiz. I just felt bad to have a quiz at the end of the presentation, so I'm not going to have any quiz today. So,
hey, great, Pete. Much appreciated, and we'll be seeing more of Pete throughout the boot camp trainings. Always appreciate your help and your insight and your 40 plus years of experience that you're helping to relay to others, myself included. So thanks a lot, Pete.
Yep, thank you.
So that really does conclude our very first virtual session for boot camp in 2024. Just a couple of logistics. Virtual day number 2 will be in 1 week. And then we'll also have a virtual day number 3, which will be held after the in-person sessions are concluded. Just make note that there is a separate agenda for each virtual day, and each agenda has a unique meeting link. So make sure you're using the link that's in the agenda for that day. So go to the virtual day 2 agenda and hit the click here button, and that will provide you with the correct link for the meeting for day 2. When it comes to the in-person session, that's going to be April 8th. That's just a few weeks away. It's fast approaching. Registration will be from 9:30 to 10 a.m. in Lewisburg at the Union County Government Building. If you have any issues with logistics or need to have some questions answered, you can reach out to Chris or myself or Shannon, and we'll be able to get those answers to you. And I don't have anything else. Chris, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just put my my email address in the chat. If you guys have any questions about any of the topics covered today, I might not have the answers, but I might be able to send you in the right direction. So please feel free to reach out.
Very good. Any questions from the group before we wrap this meeting up? Going once, going twice. Well, thank you very much for your participation. We greatly appreciate it. We'll look forward to seeing you all virtually in a week and then in person in a couple weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.